our collective commitment to protect and promote French in Quebec. That said, our community is feeling diminished by the government of Quebec's language reform. This morning, we look forward to hearing from you, hoping that a continuing dialogue will lead to greater protection and promotion of French in Quebec and greater protection and promotion of the vitality of this province's English-speaking community. Mr. Skeete, welcome.
Good morning. Could everybody hear me okay? Yeah, great. Well, thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you very much to Minister Joly for taking the time to explain what the federal government is doing in terms of language reform on their end. And I also have to applaud the courage of the federal government for recognizing the need to modernize this act, but also recognizing the relative fragility of the French language. And I say that because it sort of leads us into the reason why we're talking today about reforming Bill 101 and the impacts that are perceived and that are real for the Quebec society that are going to come. And I recognize that for the English community, you know, this is reminiscent of times where things were very difficult for the community. So I'm not insensitive to that reality. I'm not insensitive to the feelings of angst that language reform could have on the community. These past 50 years of you know, sovereignist debate on one side and the opposite on the other side have created a schism, and it has made discussing amongst ourselves difficult. So I see it and I take it upon myself to make sure to extend the hand in the hopes of building bridges. So thank you for the QCGN for the invitation. Thank you to Marlene for a continued constructive dialogue. It's really appreciated. So we're here to talk about Bill 96. And what I would like to say is maybe bring you on the journey that led me to my current point of view. And it was realizing that, you know, what makes Quebec special, beyond anything else, what makes it that je ne sais quoi that we all proudly talk to our friends and family in Ontario or in the States, right? I remember as a child, what made me say, oh, I'm from Canada, and you know, over there we speak French, was the fact that we do speak French, and that our, you know, we have a different culture from the rest of Canada that is unique and that is our own, and there's a specialness in that unicity. And you know, there's a lot of things behind that special unicity, but really the main one is the fact that it's French here, and that French is sort of what brings us together. It brings us together as our langue commune being the one that we choose to accept or adopt in public. That has nothing to do with whether or not we speak English amongst ourselves or at home or in the streets. Obviously, that is not a problem, but it is the agreed upon language of our commonality, of our public face. So when we look at that reality and we say that it's special, for me, the next question is, well, then is it worth protecting, right? Should we treat French like we would something that is, well, you know, if people care about it, it'll take care of itself and it'll go on. And if they don't, well, it'll disappear, as it should, because people don't care about it. Well, I've always been on the side that says that, you know, French is special and that it's worth protecting. And if it's worth protecting, we need to do something about it to protect it. And of course, having always gone to English school and having had a foot in English community, and of course, coming from a Francophone household, I always lived those two realities, and they were often seen as a conflict, as though for one to gain, the other had to lose. And I remember growing up thinking, I don't want to have to choose between those two things. I believe that what makes us special is French, but at the same time, I really enjoy, you know, having the ability to communicate in English, to be part of the greater Canada that is predominantly English, and that we have a unique history that needs to be cherished on both sides. So it's one of the reasons why in politics, I sort of threw away those two choices, because for me, it was a false choice. The reality is in Quebec, the language is not, ought not, and need not be a zero-sum game. And what we're trying to do in this legislation is, on the one hand, enshrine English rights and access to institutions and whatnot, and on the other side, take concrete action to protect French. With the point of view that says that French will always be fragile and requires a little bit of extra help, you know, kind of like a student in school. We have a curriculum for everybody, but the student that has trouble needs an extra tutor and needs to stay in at lunch. We need a little bit more to keep French viable in Quebec, because it's fragile even here. It's fragile in Canada. I think everybody understands that and recognizes that, but it's also fragile in Quebec. And I think that is what's new. It's recognizing that relative fragility even here, even though Francophones are the majority here. So, you know, people have had questions about the constitutional amendments that the legislation proposes. And again, a quick history on what it is that we're doing. The 1867 Constitution has three parts. There's a part that talks about provincial jurisdictions, what provinces do for themselves. There's another part that talks about what the federal government does and what it does for itself. And then there's a part that talks about shared jurisdictions. What we're proposing to amend is in the Quebec section. We're inscribing that French is our common language and that we're a distinct nation. And I think even after, you know, a few years of being next to you guys and going around Quebec and meeting different English community groups, I don't think anybody here disagrees with that. I don't think anybody disagrees that what makes Quebec special is French, that here it is French, and that Quebec is different from other provinces in that Frenchness. And that's exactly what we're doing in that proposed constitutional amendment. We're not infringing upon the rights of English-speaking Quebecers to get access to healthcare in English. We're not saying that English Quebecers aren't going to have a right to have lawyers or be treated in the justice system in their language. That's not what we're saying. What we're saying is that we're recognizing that in our jurisdiction, the common language is French. And of course, that is on the heels of a great trauma, 50 years of language debate that was always seen as zero sum. I'm asking you, and I recognize it's a big ask, to get out of that framework and recognize that it need not and ought not be a zero sum game. So quickly, I'd like to talk about some of the wins in Bill 96 that we were able to pull out. One of them being the bilingual status of cities. Historically, that's always been a delicate subject. I don't know why it's been a delicate subject, but it's always been a delicate subject for the provinces, because the law, Bill 101, says that municipalities that have 50% of English-speaking Quebecers can adopt the status of bilingual status rather. And of course, historically, that wasn't a problem, but some of the cities now are below the 50% mark. So the question has always been, what do we do with those cities that are below the threshold? And it's always been sort of a provincial hot potato, right? The more federalist parties have always said, let's not touch that, let's leave it as is. The more sovereignist parties have always said, no, let's take it away. What we're saying is, why don't we just let local municipalities decide? And if they're willing to take a stand, pass a motion, and do it for themselves, then of course, we don't have a problem with that. And that's exactly what's proposed in Bill 96, to give municipalities that autonomy, recognizing that they're closer to their people and that they'll act in accordance to what their local population wants. Another big win in Bill 96 is, of course, the recognizing that French is a right, but also that learning French is a right. In my recent consultations in 2019, one of the most popular feedbacks that I received was that English-speaking Quebecers want to stay in Quebec, but they recognize that they need French to be successful here, and that the courses or the classes that they receive from all levels of schooling and whatnot were not up to par to be able to make them successful in Quebec. And what we propose in Bill 96 is recognizing that even English-speaking Quebecers have a right to learn French and master French in order to be successful. And John was talking before about the indicators of underemployment, of the reduced revenue that the English population has. I think if we can increase the level of French fluency, writing and speaking, then that's one way for us to check off the indicator on underemployability. We can close that underemployment gap and also possibly move the needle on the civil service, which is another big indicator that I've been working on to try to get more English-speaking Quebecers into the civil service. So making French a right for everyone, I think is a big win for the English community, and I think it improves our employability and our integration prospects going forward. The other big thing that I was hearing a lot of, especially recently, I had a prominent journalist contact me, and she told me that her daughter couldn't get into Dawson or Vanier, even though she had an 80% average. She couldn't get into social science, and that made me realize that with that kind of condition, I would not have been eligible to get into CEGEP. I had a very poor average coming out of high school, and luckily, mercifully, the CEGEP that I applied to took me, and today I'm a holder of an MBA. And I think, how many people are we leaving behind by denying English-speaking Quebecers access to their own network? So what we're doing in Bill 96 is we're giving priority access to English-speaking Quebecers to their network. Now, of course, we're not going as far as some parties would like us to go by extending Bill 101 to CEGEPs. I think that would be catastrophic to the CEGEP network. And I think that would not serve anybody, because again, it puts us in this mode of opposition. It doesn't need to be zero sum. We can both win, and we can both move forward together without taking away from one another. And I think what we're proposing by giving priority access to English-speaking Quebecers to their network will not only improve educational outcomes, employability outcomes going forward, but at the same time, we're allowing the mixity, the nice mixity that occurs in our CEGEPs when Francophones and allophones come and join the network and graduate with English-speaking Quebecers. So I think that's a big win to enshrine that within Bill 96. And of course, the one that I'm most proud of is, one of the feedbacks that I hear a lot from the community is, the cat came to power and all of a sudden we're talking about language. Well, that is partly true. One of the reasons why we're talking about it is because every year the OQLF produces a report about the status of French, and that report is internal. It's not a public document. So a party, I won't even venture to say which party, but a party on one side of the spectrum or another might have a political agenda at making those reports public. If the report is bad and it says that there's slippage and that French is in danger and it's the PQ in power, well, of course they're going to quickly print off a few copies of that report and make sure everyone gets their hands on it. And the same is true for the opposite party, right? So I think what we need to do is depoliticize the language debate. Growing up, one of the things that made me the most angry was the fact that politics were always intertwined with this real responsibility that we have of protecting language. And here we are playing politics with this very important issue. By introducing a language commissioner that's named by 2/3 by the National Assembly, this independent commissioner will be able to table reports as they see fit publicly, and it won't be made public based on anyone's narrative. It'll be something that we'll all have to deal with regardless of what it says, and that will also either advise us that we're on the right path or let us know that we're not. And I think that is a win for the English community, because finally, we're not going to be using language as this tool to manipulate public opinion, to sort of instigate conflict. And that, for me, I think is a win for the English community. And I said it before, but there's also a lot of things that don't change for the English community that are also wins, because of course they shouldn't change, because English Quebecers have a right to be and be fruitful in Quebec. But I think it bears mentioning, because I've heard a lot of feedback from a lot of people that they're afraid that some of these things will change. So for starters, what doesn't change is, for instance, if you're getting your mail right now but from the Quebec government in English, of course you're going to keep getting your mail in English. If you have to deal with the justice system, of course, you're still going to have access to English in the justice system. And this bill does nothing to amend the Health and Social Services Act, which of course guarantees English-speaking Quebecers the right to receive services in their language. Another big one that I heard that I think creates a lot of fear and angst in the English community is the fact that by applying the notwithstanding clause, we're sort of free-falling on all other rights. just to be clear, any competent lawyer will tell you that when you enshrine the notwithstanding clause in a bill like Bill 96, you're limiting the scope of the notwithstanding clause to issues of language. So, to say that, for instance, you're going to be denied confidentiality with your doctor because Bill 96 is there, that's a non-starter. It's really in the scope of enforcement of the language laws with regards to populations of for employers who have to offer French in their businesses. It really has nothing to do with your right as an individual to retain counsel or to have doctors' confidentiality retained and things like that. So let's just understand that it's within the scope of the law, within the intention of the proposed law. And of course, all this is on the heels of multiple investments in the English community. Our government has doubled the investments of the English Secretariat, providing millions of dollars for employability initiatives to really move the needle on the underemployment of English-speaking communities, to enhance health and social welfare outcomes. Recently, yesterday rather, I proposed an announcement that added 43 new wellness centers to the 32 new wellness centers to the 43 that already existed. That'll help break isolation for our seniors. We're also proposing to create transversality between Francophone community groups that serve English populations, give them the tools to better serve the English community, because I wouldn't want to create a system where only English community groups create services for the English community. I think we need to work more together. So there's money in the recent budget for initiatives like that. So all these things point to one thing. How do you explain why, on the one side, this government can double investments in the English Secretariat while at the same time propose Bill 96? Well, for me, it's easy to understand, but I'm asking you to join me in understanding that it's because it's not zero sum. It need not, it ought not, and it should not be zero sum. And together, we can build a Quebec that at the same time protects Quebec from becoming Louisiana, while at the same time recognizing that the English community has serious vitality issues that need to be addressed and that we're currently working on to address. So again, thank you for the invitation. I'm happy to have had the chance to speak with you today. I hope that you guys enjoy your conference, your deliberations, and of course, recognize that the bill was proposed at the end of session. It's going to sit there. It's going to be analyzed, examined, read, and I invite you to propose amendments to us, to come and speak with us and help us make the bill better. If there's anything that we missed, if there's anything that impacts the community unduly, let me know. And there will be a consultation process where we're going to be sitting down, all the parties, all the opposition parties together to make the bill better. And understand that the intention here is recognizing the relative force of the 8 million Francophones that we are in a sea of North American English, while recognizing that the English community has a right to a vibrant community. And that's what I'm all about, and that's what we're all about. And I hope that you enjoy the rest of your day and the rest of your session. And I want to thank you again for having me today.
Thank you, Christopher. But because we're running ahead of time, I would like to take some questions from some of our participants, if you're fine with that.
Actually, I'm not, because I'm already late for a meeting that I have to go to, so I can't take any questions. But anybody who wants to get a hold of me can reach out to me. I'm very, some of you already.
Well, can I just tell you the 3 most important questions that keep coming up, and then you can go and run with them if you like. Who is included in the Quebec nation? That's not clear for a lot of members of the English-speaking communities. That includes also people like myself who happen to be of other origin, but it's English-speaking. Yes, would you like to answer it? Go ahead, please, Ben.
So I hear that question a lot. We're all Quebecers. So the easy answer is we're all Quebecers.
I don't think a lot of the members of the English-speaking community feel that way. The second, and the most important, I think, is the overuse of the notwithstanding clause. I know it was supposed to be an exception. It's used throughout Bill 96. That is of grave concern for people who believe in minority rights being protected, not using the notwithstanding clause, obviously, to override. And one of the biggest, I think, concerns is the powers of search without a warrant in businesses. For me, that is definitely an infringement of rights when somebody can come into a business and search, take the equipment, take the computers. I think that has to be looked at and totally unacceptable. And I believe that those three main points, there are others, of course, that are in the chat room, and we'd be happy at the QCGN to send you the questions that were addressed by a lot of the participants who are participating. But we thank you for the time you took to be with us today. And we look forward, as you said, to bringing forth recommendations from our group to make the bill better and to also assure the English-speaking minority that we will be protected, that our rights will be protected under Bill 96, which at the moment, we don't feel that is the case. And I think a lot of the participants are saying that. So I thank you so much for being with us today, and I wish you a great day.
Thank you for having me, and enjoy the rest of your conference.
Thank you. So it's my pleasure now to also invite the Literacy Quebec group to present their video.
Hi, I'm Laura, and I work for Literacy Quebec. I've lived in Montreal for about 2 years now. What makes Montreal special? Well, it's the diversity in the nature, the surrounding area with the St. Lawrence River, with the mountains and the forests. There's diversity in the art scene with the Fringe Festival and the orchestra and big productions and concerts. There's diversity in the food scene with bagels and dim sum and shawarma, one of my personal favorites. There's diversity in the history of Montreal. It's been around for nearly 400 years, so there's the history of Aboriginal culture that's been around for way longer than that, and the history of the French coming and the English coming and lots of immigration from all over the world. So for me, what I love best about Montreal and what makes it special is the diversity.
Hi, my name's Chris and I work for Literacy Quebec, and I moved here to Quebec 6 years ago. And the thing that I love most about our province and our region, number one, the expressions and the Franglish. I love it. It's so easy to understand. Number two, I love the 4 seasons of Quebec. In the winter, you can do winter sports. Then you got spring, beautiful. Summer's amazing. Autumn is just incredibly beautiful as well with the changing colors. And lastly, poutine. That's the number one thing I love about Quebec.
Hi, my name is Margot Legault and I work at Literacy Quebec. I'm born and raised in Pointe-Claire, which is on the island of Montreal. And what I love about our province is the fact that you can travel throughout the province and see so many amazing things. And we even have a built-in alarm clock, because the closer you get back into the city of Montreal, the bumpier the roads get. And so there's no way the passengers in your cars are going to stay asleep the whole time.
Thank you so much, Literacy Quebec. That was a wonderful video. Now I'd like to invite Jonathan Goldbloom, who's a partner at Avenue Strategic Communications, to speak to us about the communications and stakeholder relations strategy that Jonathan is putting together. The floor is yours, Jonathan.
Thank you, Eleni. Thank you for that kind introduction, and thanks everyone for joining us so early in the morning. What I'd like to do is, I have 3 parts of the presentation. One, I'd first like to sort of review where we've been over the last several weeks. It's not been particularly boring. We've been pretty busy trying to move the agenda and also responding to different initiatives. Then we have some research that we'd like to share with you. It's just a tidbit, it's a teaser. We've been out in the field in early June, polled about 2,500 people from across Quebec, and we'd like to share with you some very preliminary findings. So we're about 2 or 3 weeks away from having the full analysis, but obviously this research is going to be pivotal as we move forward. And then I'd like to talk about the next phase of the campaign. I view this as a 3-phase campaign. The first phase ends today with this conference. The next phase is from now to whenever the public hearings start, which is getting ourselves ready for those public hearings and trying to build some momentum going into that. And then the third phase will be the public hearings and the debate in the National Assembly. And I guess there'll probably be a fourth phase, because I'm sure there's going to be action if this bill is passed in whatever form, either legally from a PR perspective and whatever. So without further ado, let me start with a review of phase one. Chelsea, can you put my slides up?
Do you see them?
I can't, but can anyone else? No.
No. Okay, good to know. Share screen two.
Okay, next slide, please. So the campaign to date, QCGN has been really front and center and part of all the principal news cycles. We look at that, what we've seen. First of all, there was the lead up when there was all these teasers about changes to the Official Languages Act, and of course, the Quebec government, prior to the tabling of Bill 96, kept putting out trial balloons, whether it was on caps for CEGEPs, whether it was on signage, whether it was on municipalities and their rights, as Mr. Skeete just talked about. So there was the lead up to Bill 96, then there was Bill 96. There was Mélanie Joly, who released her white paper, which led to the setting up of a special committee to look at elements related to employment and services in official language minorities. Then there was the tabling of her bill. There's been the federal response to Bill 96, Mr. Trudeau's intervention on the constitutional proposal of Quebec. There's been the block motion, which has been in the House twice. In all of those instances, QCGN's had a quick response team so that we were able to intervene and make sure the voice of the community was heard quickly and effectively. So that's relied on multiple spokespersons, largely Marlene, the president, but it's been critical for us that we be out there and that we be commenting, even if at certain times it's just saying we have to put this under review. But we wanted to make sure the Quebec's English-speaking community was part of the stakeholder group that was there and part of the equation and part of the debate. We've also created our own news cycles. Jack Jedwab has released two clips of research. They too are part of a larger study. We'll be releasing more prior to Canada Day. But again, it was out there to try and frame the debate and show attitudes of Quebecers, both English and French speaking, to a variety of issues. We met with Joly Barrette. We again were public about that. And I think one of our most important initiatives has been the briefing on Bill 96. The work that Marion has done in terms of bringing what is everyone calls a very complex, multifaceted piece of legislation, which is really changing the relationship between Quebecers and between Quebec and Canada. We've been the ones who have probably done the most in-depth analysis outside of the government lawyers. And we've taken that on the road, shared it with the community, we shared it with editorial boards, we shared it with political parties, etc. So I think that's been very important and has led to significant coverage by Alison Haynes and others in the Gazette, the Globe and Mail, and less. We still have work to do to make sure it's in the French press and better understood. But it certainly has been a pivotal piece of work. And we've done the same thing on Bill C-32. So that again, it's showing that we have that it's evidence-based, research-based, and fact-based. Next slide, Chelsea. A key element of the strategy has also been is outreach, internal outreach within the community, in that we appreciated the QCGN did many, many weeks ago, really since the beginning of the year, that these pieces of legislation were coming, that they were going to be pivotal to the community. But for the community to have an effective response, it can't be a top-down response. There had to be consultation. There has to be ongoing consultation. And you'll see that's pivotal to the strategy going forward. But you had to start by setting up those lines of communication to be effective. So we've done that in two ways. One has been with the politicians. I mentioned that we had the minister, a meeting with Minister Jean-Marc Barrette, but we have reached out to all political parties, or those who would be willing to meet with us. Minister Joly indicated that that she's been in regular contact with Marlene and Sylvia. We've been meeting with members of the Liberal caucus. We've in fact presented our analysis of Bill 96 to a good number of the federal Liberals. We've reached out to the Conservatives. We provincially, Dominique Anglade participated in the webinar. We've reached out to Solidaire. So we're trying to ensure that all people, even if they're not firmly with us, that they at least understand our perspective, because that's going to be important as we go forward and try and build common bridges of understanding. Internally, we've presented, we've met with different of our membership groups, but we've also reached out to people like the Black community, like Blue Metropolis, the Quebec Association of Independent Schools. We've been in contact with the leadership of the CEGEPs, so both at the student level and at the administrative level. Again, making sure as we move forward that we have this kind of dialogue ready, and that we're present and have that kind of communications put forward and ready to go. The other thing we've been doing is we've tried to be a source of information. I mentioned what we've done in terms of Bill 96, but we've had about now 7 or 8 webinars. The first set of webinars were designed to really ensure that we were all starting from the same vantage point. So they were more historical in nature, where we had different people come in and explain the history of language legislation in Quebec and in Canada. Graham Fraser participated, so the former Commissioner of Official Languages. One of the more entertaining ones was an interview with Bernie Saint-Laurent, who talked about covering the different episodes. Marion did one as well. And then we've gone more recently starting to talk about the particular proposals on the table. So we had the one on Bill 96, and we had Dominique Anglade, as I mentioned before. This convention, or this conference, sorry, convention is not the right word, is another step in ensuring that people are informed and knowledgeable about what's at stake and what the different issues are. So as you'll see, we have a panel coming up which describes, under the chairmanship of Eric Maldoff, which will go over the implications in different fields, whether it's education, business, the municipalities, justice, access to justice. Last night we had it on the human rights and notwithstanding clause. Largely because one of our themes is we need to build coalitions. And as I get into the second phase, that's where we really need to put more of an effort. I think that came out last night in the conversation. And it's probably on the notwithstanding clause of human rights in the charter, this charter-free zone that the CAC is trying to develop, where we think we can build the strongest coalition. In that what we see is two things. One, that there's pride in the Quebec Charter and the Canadian Charter. As Royal mentioned last night, René Lévesque sent a copy of the Quebec Charter to every household in Quebec when it was passed. And all the polling data shows that there is an enormous amount of pride in that piece of work. The other one shows that in certain areas, individual rights trump collective rights in terms of Quebecers' minds. And so I think you're going to see that there's a number of areas where we think we can build support, whether it's access to justice, access to healthcare, and issues like that. But a key going forward is going to be the research. And as I mentioned earlier, we have been doing research, and I'm hoping that Sean's on the Zoom at this point. Is he on, Chelsea?
Yeah, Sean is here.
All right, so I'm going to ask Sean, who is a volunteer, has been providing Avenue with counsel on how to do on public opinion research and actually helped us in the field. So I'm going to ask Sean to, as I say, give you a teaser, in that this is an in-depth piece of research, probably the most in-depth piece of research that we've done on behalf of the community in many, many years. So we're still analyzing it. It's going to be a basis of a lot of what we do. But I think what Sean's pulled out so far is interesting. So I'm going to turn it over to Sean to take you through the initial findings or preliminary findings. Sean.
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me and can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes and yes.
Super. So I'll just launch right in after Jonathan's introduction. So off the top, we performed a survey. This was quite recently, so just ending about a week ago in Quebec, and it was evenly weighted for the population of the province, getting a good sampling of Francophone respondents, Anglophones, and Allophones. It was all online. It was weighted to be representative of the population. I'm going to spoil the lead even more and tell you some of the take-homes before I show you some of the data. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the landscape, how things currently sit, and how the English-speaking and French-speaking communities are currently interacting and relating to each other, and what their concerns and preoccupations are. Then we'll pivot to Bill 96 and talk a little bit about salience, awareness, understanding of the issues that are surrounding it. We'll talk a little bit about rights, understanding of group and individual rights, the trade-offs and opinions about the usage of the notwithstanding clause or section 33. Then we'll wrap it up with some concluding thoughts on this preliminary work. So the landscape. As a starting point, we wanted to understand identity a little bit about different groups and attachment of Quebecers. And we measured this in a few different ways and came out with a composite identity metric that incorporates group bias, collective esteem, how proud I am to be a member of this group, how central the different aspects of identity are to people. We found it's something that is maybe predictable, but you know, everything's pretty predictable in hindsight. So basically, English-speaking Quebecers feel more Canadian and a little less Quebecois. There's a relatively large gap here. So this is the bar graph, the panel that's on the far left. So Anglophones have it more core to their identity of being Canadian than it is to be a Quebecer. And less so, but similar levels of belonging to their language group. This holds for both, there's a relatively large gap here. English preferring allophones look a lot like Anglophones. This holds for both allophones with no strong English-French preference, as well as those who prefer French. Immigrants immigrate to Canada to be Canadian, not super surprising. Interestingly though, allophones who are comfortable in both French and English, so allophones with no preference or allophones who prefer French, have a much higher Quebec identity score. This is a very encouraging sign for Quebec culture and goes a decent way towards showing that immigrants who learn French should not be seen as a threat to the French-speaking community. Among Francophones, the pattern of Anglophones is reversed, though the degree of attachment to Canada is about as strong among Francophones as it is among allophones. So this might be surprising to some. I'm sorry, there's a question? Okay.
Oh, you can continue.
the way the screen is set up, I can't see who's asking or saying things.
Sorry, Sean, you can continue. I'll make sure everyone stays muted.
Thank you. So again, the degree of attachment to Canada is about as strong among Francophones as it is in allophones. So it's just their cultural attachment to Quebec and to being a Francophone per se is stronger. And now I have to figure out how to go to the next slide. There. Super interesting stuff. However, for today, that's the last we're going to see of allophones. For the remainder, I'll be speaking about the English-speaking community and the French-speaking community. So, and that's for today in this preliminary analysis. It was just much simpler for doing the analysis, building the charts, and statistical power. We'll have more details on allophones at a later date. So one of the research minds that I worked with for this project is her training at McGill is in collective identity and establishing this. And long story short, a very important component to understanding identity is understanding how groups see each other and how often and how they interact, whether they have friends in the other community. What we see is that for the most part, English speakers and French speakers in Quebec interact quite a bit. Anglophones have much more community contact with Francophones than the inverse. So there's only 8% of Anglophones who have low community. Sorry, can whoever that is go on mute? Yeah, I'm a one-track person. When there's an interjection, I lose my train of thought pretty easily. Sorry. So Anglophones have more community contact with Francophones than the other way around. And this is pretty easily understandable as there's just simply far more Francophones in the province than Anglophones. So there's a lot of group interaction. This is a positive thing. They identify a bit differently. They interact a bunch. Do they like each other? Essentially, yes. We asked respondents to rate from 0 to 100 how favorably they felt towards a variety of groups. So we've got the general population, the English-speaking community, and the French-speaking community here. And by and large, it's all positive. There's nothing that's sitting at 10, 20, 40% that you might see if the groups didn't like each other. They're all quite positive. Anglophones see Francophones at 62, positive, better than halfway. Curiously, I found Anglophones, English-speaking community feels more positively towards Francophones in the rest of Canada than they do to their fellow Francophone Quebecers. But even curiouser to overseas Francophones. So English-speaking Quebecers feel some attachment to Francophones in the rest of Canada and Francophones overseas. Why would that be? Might be that us English-speaking Quebecers see ourselves as more French than American. I don't know. Worth digging into when we get a little bit further along. Francophones, on the other hand, see Anglophones and allophones who speak French about the same, 65, 68 on 100. And they see Francophones elsewhere in Canada and out of Canada all very positively. So anything to the contrary is apparently a myth. The only group that is dipping into borderline territory of maybe not as likable is that last bar on the lower right-hand side of the French-speaking views this community chart. That's allophones whose mother tongue is neither English nor French, who prefer English. So that group might be the one that makes people nervous and uncomfortable. And they came here and they assimilate into Anglo culture. If there are some immigrants like that, are they all like that? Are we being replaced? You can see how people might have some anxiety there. Next up, we asked, both groups what their priorities were, and also what they thought the other group's priorities were. And I'll show the other groups and what our perceptions are of each other in a moment. So before going into what we think about each other, in all my years of running surveys, and it's a decent number, getting on a decade now, I would say this is very typical for Canada. You've got healthcare is always on top. Healthcare is always our top priority. Right now, COVID is number 2, economy is number 3, environment is number 4. A year ago, it would have been environment number 2, economy number 3. A year from now, it'll probably go back. There's basically no difference here between the English-speaking community, which is in red, and the Francophone community, which is in blue. So we have exactly the same priorities. The only difference is protect the French language, which Francophones place about as much priority on as lowering taxes, while Anglophones care a little bit less about that. Broadly speaking, though, same top goals. Here's the interesting part. When we ask both groups what the other group cares about, both groups underestimate by a significant amount what the other group cares about their priorities. So I care about healthcare, but Francophones, they don't care as much as I do about healthcare. Francophones, I care about healthcare, but Anglophones don't care about healthcare as much as I do. Anglophones wildly overestimate how much Francophones care about protecting and supporting the French language. It's important, 20%, 19%, 1 in 5 thinks this is a top priority, but it's not the preoccupation of 47% of Francophones as the most important issue. Francophones, on the other hand, misattribute to Anglophones a focus on, it's a priority, but it's not the top priority of fighting against racism and discrimination and protecting minority language rights to a lesser extent, but it's still overemphasized. So both groups misunderstand that we have the same priorities, and both groups misattribute an overemphasis on language to the other groups. When it comes to the Anglophone and Francophone or English-speaking and French-speaking communities' subjective experience and impressions of the CAQ government, the two groups don't seem to agree on how it's going. French-speaking community think that the CAQ is doing fine and is creating conditions that foster positive relations between the communities. This is very, very important in determining how groups interact. Institutional buy-in for creating positive relationships. They also seem to think that the CAQ government wants Francophones and Anglophones and Allophones all to have positive relationships or relations with each other. They think that the CAQ government is doing what it can and they're doing something positive and that this will all lead to the best. Meanwhile, the English-speaking community does not share this Pollyanna-ish view. Many of the English-speaking community, 44%, do not think that Anglophones have institutional support for positive relations. And a majority think the CAQ is not creating conditions that foster positive relations. This is important for a few reasons. I'll discuss why after the next slide.
You're talking about the English, and they want to make the French language French only in Quebec. They're still talking about it.
So when asked whether there are too many allophones in Quebec, too many Anglophones in Quebec, it's only about a third, just under a third from the French-speaking community who agree with these ideas. It's either a lot or relatively little compared to the tone of the debate. When asked whether or not they think Anglophones and English-speaking Quebecers are being forced out of Quebec, only 14% of the French-speaking community agrees with that idea. Only 14% of the French-speaking community thinks that Anglophones and English-speaking Quebecers are being forced out of Quebec. On the other hand, 65% of the Anglophones or the English-speaking community think that Anglophones and English-speaking Quebecers are being forced out of Quebec. So there's an asymmetry here. One side does not understand the impact on the other side, and that the other side feels threatened. They think that the government is providing institutional support. They think that the government is fostering positive relations and that everything is kind of going okay. The other side feels under attack and that they're being forced out. I'm going to move now to Bill 96. What we know, what we believe it will lead to. So what's more important than Bill 96 right now? Apparently everything. So Bill 96, protect and support the French language and reform the Charter of the French language. I've got it boxed in. I don't know if you can see, it's close to the bottom. What's more important? Improving the healthcare system, vaccinating against COVID, building better relations with the Indigenous communities, protecting the environment. There's very few things that are as unimportant to the people that we asked from this list as this project. And who knows what's in the bill? So we asked how familiar people are, and before I describe the results, just know that you can usually subtract about 10% from these things at least, because lots of people lie because they don't want to sound ignorant. So who's familiar? Very few. About a third of Quebecers say that they know. And the very familiars are 10% in the English-speaking community and a half that in the French-speaking community. So who knows what's here? Almost nobody. Is it important? Not to very many people. So naturally, for something most people don't know about and aren't familiar with, opinions are polarized on its impact. Anglophones feel threatened. The majority of Francophones either agree or have no idea what it means for Anglophones. So its impact unjustly threatens the Anglophone community and their rights. 17% of Francophones agree, or French-speaking community agree, that it unjustly threatens the English-speaking community. 40% have no opinion. So you put those two numbers together, you get almost 60% who think that it either threatens Anglophones or I don't know, what does this have to do with Anglophones? 13% think that it's helping. So 13% of the people who are asked think that this actually helps the English-speaking community. And only a third of the people we asked think that it's appropriate or doesn't go far enough in the French-speaking community. When it comes to, so on the one hand, I don't really know about it. It's not that important. Maybe it's helping, maybe it's hurting Anglophones. I don't really know. About a third are the ones who think that it's appropriate or doesn't go far enough. And when it comes to whether Bill 96 is helping the French language, Anglos or the English-speaking community think it goes too far. So that's 67%. It's a lot. It's pretty much as unanimous as you can get. And here, the majority of Francophone agree that it's appropriate or needs to go further. So on the one hand, I don't really know about what it's doing for Anglophones. Maybe nothing, maybe helping. When it comes to the French language, this is appropriate or not far enough. So the priority is on the French language. And really, I think what I'm starting to see in this is the English-speaking community is collateral damage or an unanticipated consequence of how it impacts the English-speaking community. approval for the elements that we tested and asked about is pretty universal among Francophones. The only ones without majority approval among French-speaking community are the CEGEP stuff. That is, which one? Limit the proportion of overall students studying in English-speaking CEGEPs. So not majority support, but still more support than not support. And the imposition of or eliminating the ability to require that people be able to speak English or other languages when applying for a job. So that one also had less support. And I think it's a rational thing. I think that people understand that for Quebec to be able to buy and sell products and especially services to a global market, we need to be able to do that in the languages of those markets. So I think people intuitively get that, at least more so than what some of the consequences of the other elements are, which they broadly support. It's notable to me, at least, if you look at the dark blue bars on the French-speaking community side versus the dark red bars on the English community side. So this is consistent with our findings from throughout the survey, that this disproportionately impacts the English-speaking community. So there's much more strong disapproval among the English-speaking community than there is strong approval among the French-speaking community. So it's there's approval, but it's not very strong. And then what are the expected consequences of Bill 96? Well, there's a bunch of good stuff Francophones see is likely to happen. Allophones will become better in French somehow. Anglophones will become better in French somehow. Relationships between the different communities will improve. There'll be more opportunities for Francophone businesses in Quebec. Somehow, French speakers mostly anticipate positive impacts from Bill 96, including economic opportunity for Francophones. So the connection that some of these elements might limit economic opportunity and individual opportunity has not been made in the French-speaking community. Meanwhile, most of the English-speaking community believe that English speakers will leave the province, as will small businesses, and that the Quebec economy will suffer. So English speakers are broadly and in much higher numbers expecting negative outcomes than the French-speaking community from Bill 96. Okay, turning now to our rights as Quebecers. Prioritization of different rights. So in general, when we asked respondents, would you say that the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms helps Canada move in the right direction? There's majority support from all groups. Wrong direction, under 10% from all groups. Some don't really know whether it's a good thing or bad thing, but the charter is broadly popular. Very few see it as a bad thing. When it comes to overriding the charter, so we asked people and explained about the notwithstanding clause, and this means that in some cases, premiers can override the charter. First of all, do you agree with the principle behind this section, section 33? What we find is that Anglophones or the English-speaking community does not agree. 57% of the English-speaking community doesn't think that section 33 should be used. The French-speaking community it's still more disagree than agree, but it's a bit more of a nuanced position, with almost half saying maybe And as we'll see on the next slide, it's pretty situational. So even among the Francophone community, so here we have 4 different instances of Section 33 being used. So the notwithstanding clause being used by premiers for different things. First, we've got our current situation. Then we have Ford using it to redistrict the municipal boundaries to take a bit of revenge on his political opponents. Another one in New Brunswick for vaccinations, and another one in Alberta for redefining marriage to exclude same-sex couples. What we see is the English-speaking community very opposed to the current usage in Quebec, and then there's a bit of a nuance here across the other 3, where what we find is that the English-speaking community, maybe because they're predisposed to dislike the current use, are a bit more opposed to all other uses of the notwithstanding clause than the French-speaking community. Meanwhile, the French-speaking community is quite situational, more opposed to the use of Section 33 for limiting same-sex marriage, less opposed to using it for changes to the Charter of the French language. Interestingly, if you add up the 21 and 16% of the French-speaking community who are opposed to that usage for the current Bill 96, 37% of the French-speaking community are opposed to using Section 33. So I think it's going to be pretty positive. They don't think it's going to really harm anyone, but if you're going to do it, at least a third of the French-speaking community thinks, like, all of that stuff is good, but I don't really agree with how you're doing it. And here's why that might be the case. So this is a very interesting plot, and I'm kind of busy. Basically, what it's showing is if you had to choose between the needs of the collective, the many, and the needs of the individual, or the rights of those 2 groups, which trade-off would you choose? More individual rights or more group rights? And we've got here the French-speaking community and the English-speaking community, in blue and red, respectively. What we find is that despite being in line with using Section 33, mostly, Francophones do not look so different from Anglophones on most of their charter rights. When it comes to individual privacy, the French-speaking community are closer to more individual rights than they are to more rights for the French-speaking community. Same thing for the right to defend oneself in a court of law. Same thing for the right to access health services and have a say in the care that you receive. This paints a maybe surprising contrast. While this bill is poised to take away some rights, and all of the issues of the bill are quite popular, and the usage of the charter override is quite popular. It's not unanimously popular, but it's relatively popular. Taking away individual rights is not popular. When it comes to rights, the French-speaking community sides with rights, more so than with community interests. In particular, again, privacy, healthcare service, and the right to defend oneself in court. Okay, so this is the wrap-up slide. So the English-speaking community, composed of Anglophones, Allophones, some Francophones. The French-speaking community, composed of the same, in Quebec have much more in common than we realize. All groups would say right now that we have bigger fish to fry than Project Bill 96. Healthcare, COVID, that's a winning recipe. Familiarity with and prioritization of this project are both relatively low. very few people would cede their individual rights in favor of the collective rights of Francophones. Not even most Francophones would choose this. An equal number of English and French-speaking Quebecers would strongly prioritize personal privacy and the right to healthcare and access to healthcare, and have a say in their healthcare, and to then defend oneself in a court of law over the collective rights of Francophones. Most believe that bilingualism is a right. I didn't show data for this today, but it will be coming in our subsequent analyses. So the right for Francophones to have the choice of bilingual education and to be bilingual themselves is a very compelling argument against Bill 96. Generally speaking, no one wants Anglophones pushed out of Quebec. Francophones in the French-speaking community do not believe that this will be a consequence of Bill 96, although Anglophones believe it will be, to the detriment of the economy. The French-speaking community believe that the proposed changes will increase their economic opportunities. However, there's some controversy over how this relates to allophones. And that is all I've got. Back to you, Jonathan.
Thank you, Sean. I think that that's a nice teaser. I want to remind people that I said at the beginning that this is an in-depth study, and these are just preliminary findings. In about 2 weeks, we hope to be able to share a more complete analysis with people. But we wanted people to see where we were heading in some of the initial conclusions. And I think that already you can see how this could and will be central to the communications plan we're developing going forward, as will some of the things that were discussed last night, particularly the international element. Chelsea, can I have my last slides up, please? So as I said earlier, the presentation was divided into 3 sections. And so now I'd like to go to the section moving forward. From a communications perspective, no, the previous slide, Chelsea. No, previous slide, the one you had that was talking to. Our focus,
Jonathan,
yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I was wondering if because we do have time, if we could take 3 questions, because there's a lot of questions in the chat room about the research, or do you want to do it at the end?
Why don't we do it at the end? I'll be like 5 minutes.
Oh, okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
So moving forward in the next phases, our focus is going to be primarily on Bill 96. That's the piece of legislation that's going to be debated in the National Assembly, and there's going to be a decision by Christmas. The Official Languages Act will continue to be involved, but we're waiting to see where that bill goes and whether there's an election in between. So we're going to continue to contribute and be part of that debate, but really for the short term, we're putting a lot of our energy on Bill 96. Our goal is to build a coalition, not with other interested parties, whether those are people that supported or were opposed to Bill 21. We're going to highlight the human rights and individual freedoms, and some of the elements that come out of that research, the support in relationship to privacy and in relationship to access to healthcare, going after those elements of the bill that are clearly an infringement on that. The strategy is divided in a number of ways. Media relations will continue to be active in the media. We're going to continue with outreach and public consultation, which will be one of the hearts of the media relations strategy. So what does that mean? Is that we'll be announcing within a week the leadership of a committee that's going to head the public consultation. And we're going to be holding meetings with interested parties in July and early August, so that we're ready and well informed going into the public hearings the National Assembly will be having. So the idea will be that we will have a consultation, for example, on the impact on municipalities, the impact on access to justice, the impact on education, whether that's for the CEGEPs whether that's the permits that are not going to be renewable for people who come from outside Canada and could study in English schools. It will be on all of those by sector and overall, and we'll be doing those virtually. There'll be a regional emphasis as well. So that those will lead to statements. We hope the media will cover all those. We'll be releasing our data, and we'll continue to develop positions and put them forward over the course of the summer. Outreach is going to be critical, not only through the public consultation process, but we've already met with certain business groups. We're going to continue to do that. We're going to continue to meet with people who we think would be sympathetic and interested in what we presented today and our positions on Bill 96. And so over the course of the summer, we're going to be reaching out to key opinion leaders and engaging them in a conversation. We're going to be setting up a legal committee to develop our legal strategy. Last night, they talked about international strategy going to the United Nations. We also talked about a reference to the Supreme Court. We're going to be bringing together some of our community's top legal minds to help us with that. The other thing that we're announcing today is that we're moving forward with a letter writing campaign, which is a platform that we've set up. Chelsea will be putting the address in the chat, but it's called it's focused on the notwithstanding clause, but it's on all of the issues related to Bill 96. By putting your postal code into the platform, you can then choose a letter to send, which will go to Minister Joly Barrette, Premier Legault, Dominic Anglade, as well as your local MNA and your local MP automatically. So our goal is to get as many of these letters in so that the politicians can see that there's concern. You'll also be able to see on the map how many letters we have per constituency, per area. So that's a key part. We're also going to start organizing a campaign where we go and meet with the leadership, or not the leadership, with MNAs and MPs across the province. And we need to have those face-to-face meetings. And so we're going to be setting up a group that's going to be working with our regional partners to do that. Next slide, Chelsea. So this is just a summary of what we're going to be doing. The goal is to be ready for the public consultation in the fall, but also to have set the tone and the framework for that, those discussions. So some of the issues are already on the table, and we start to put the government on the defensive. We need to have concrete examples. We need to show how this bill will affect the daily lives of Quebecers, and that kind of communications and examples. Kinsella talked about the fines last night. We've got to continue to come up with those. And, you know, with Sam Roberts, is our Arcade Fire, should they be limited to 10% of the recordings on public systems in the government? These kinds of things we have to continue to bring out, build support for, and build a coalition. So on that note, I'd be pleased. I think we have time for questions and answers, whether it's on the research or on the communications plan. This is just the homepage of the letter writing campaign, which we're launching today. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you, Sin. And I will take 3 questions that have been coming up on the chat. And the first one has to do with the data. And I think Sean will be able to answer it. So to what extent were Anglophones living outside Montreal consulted, and did their responses differ from Anglo-Montrealers' responses? And was the data broken down by age, and how did these perceptions differ across age groups? Sean?
Good question. So I'll say that some of I'll answer the last part first, which is how did the different groups who are in different places and might have different lived experiences differ? That'll have to come in the full analysis. This is the preliminary analysis, and it's It's a bit more detailed than I can answer right now. What I will say is that we did have a good representation of Anglophones, not just from Montreal, but from where they live across the province. And so we did sample and weight accordingly, according to the census. And we weighted to be representative of age, gender, language, and region.
Was it by telephone surveys,
So
emails,
an
social media?
Online survey.
Totally online.
Yes, that's right.
Totally online. Okay. The other question that I wanted to take, sorry. I have to go through a lot of chats. What will be the role of social media with respect to the key initiatives? I think that's addressed to Jonathan.
It'll be critical. And one of the reasons, once we have this data, we are going to develop a digital marketing campaign focused on the groups that we think are going to be sensitive to some of the positions. So that's really an integral part of the next phase of the campaign. And we'll be working with specialists to get that done.
There was a question also by Maria, in fact, and she was asking about disabilities, Anglos with disabilities. Were they at all surveyed? Sean, I think.
Yep. Yeah.
The question is for Sean.
I was trying to think of if we sought out or capture that information. I'm not sure. I'd have to get back to you.
Okay, that's fine.
I don't think so. In remembering the questions, I would say the answer is no. But I'm not the expert. I'm the spectator.
Jonathan, there's also a question. Obviously, the media tour will include French media, obviously, but there was a question to that effect.
You know, one of the challenges is making sure that we're in the French media. We have made headway over the last weeks. Certainly, our response to the Official Languages Act changes was covered widely. You know, once you get, and the briefing we had on Bill 96 was covered widely in the English and French press. There are two challenges with the French. You know, one of the, if you get CP or La Presse Canadienne to cover your story, that helps, and that gets you across both linguistic media. You know, the other one is the TVA, as was discussed last night or raised last night. That empire is difficult to penetrate, and it's difficult for us to get a sympathetic audience. We have put together under the Communications Committee of QCGN, some of whom are on the call today, trying to develop a strategy to deal with that. And we're going to become much more aggressive in the coming weeks and trying to get our position across on TVA and the Journal de Montréal and the Journal de Quebec. And yes, through the public consultations, we're hoping that we'll be able to generate coverage throughout the summer in both media. In that when we talk about issues like privacy, when we talk about franchisation of companies and of not-for-profits, when we talk about access to healthcare and whether you know, if you live in Sherbrooke, will you be able to continue? Is this law in contradiction to the access to healthcare provisions that are of the law of Quebec? Eric Maldoff and others will have more on that in the next panel. But all of those things, this week ought to be in the press as much as possible, social media and traditional media over the coming weeks. We've got an enormous battle ahead of capturing the hearts and minds of Francophones to understand the implications of this bill and the type of society that it's putting forward.
Rita made a very good point about using community newspapers, and especially I think in the allophone communities where their local papers in their own language actually are the best way to reach a certain age group. I know that from my own parents. So I hope that's included in your plan also, Jonathan.
Yes, and the multicultural radio station.
Yes, I meant all media that had to do.
Yeah.
So thank you. That was excellent. Sean, thank you. Continue the great work. Someone did ask, sorry, if this will be available to the participants, if this study. I know it's a preliminary study for the moment.
We're gonna wait, and we feel it's much better to wait and have the full study. So this was a teaser. The full study.
It was a great teaser.
So we're whetting your appetite, and we'll have a full report in about 2 weeks, which we will sharing broadly. And we'll
Thank
be
you.
sure to send everyone who's registered for the conference will get a copy.
No, thank you very much, Jonathan, to you and your team. And thank you, Sean, for being with us also. So now we will have another video by another one of our partners or collaborators, the Regional Association of West Quebecers.
The video is coming. Okay.
Thanks.
The Outaouais region is special because of the many opportunities that it offers for growth and exploration. We love the harmonious relationships that you can develop with your neighbors, be they francophones, allophones, or anglophones. The scenery, the history, and the fresh air. The community and the people make it a special place to call home.
Thank you so much to the Regional Association of West Quebecers. We do live in a beautiful place. I think everybody can agree with me on that. And thank you to Harley Campbell. It is now time, we're ahead of time, but it is now time to take a small break. We will take a break for 15 minutes since we are running ahead. Please go get a coffee, a glass of water, or whatever your preferred drink is, and join us in 15 minutes. Thank you. Please enjoy the We Are Quebec team slide. Yes, we're starting to record again, so if you'll permit me, we will mute everybody. And there's been a change of plans, and I'm very happy to welcome again the chair of the QCGN and a very good friend and fellow ex-parliamentarian. And we've been through many battles, Marlene, and this is the battle of our lives, I have a feeling, even though we've done more over the years. I think this is it. So I'd like to begin, Marlene, in asking you, because I think it's not clear to everybody, at least that's what I'm getting from the sense of the chat, of how much work has been done behind the scenes with Minister Joly and also with Christopher Skeete. We were unable to ask Minister Joly questions because she had a long session, as she said, but a lot of the issues that a lot of the participants are asking on the chat, I know that you have addressed and other members of the team have addressed. So you might want to talk a little bit about what went on behind the scenes, but at the same time, going forward, that how prepared the QCGN is to go and really argue out, the protection of minority English rights in Quebec, at the same time of actually supporting, of course, minority rights all across Canada.
Thank you, Eleni, and thank you to all of the participants who are here again this morning and who were here last night, and to the participants who are joining us for the first time this morning. QCGN has had an ongoing dialogue with Minister Joly, if I'm going to talk about the Official Languages Act, and that dialogue began long before I was elected president of QCGN. Back in 2017, 2018, I apologize if you hear background noise. There are repairs going on in my apartment building and the sound is carrying into my apartment. So I apologize.
I thought it was just Montreal.
It is Montreal. It's not just in the streets, it's in the buildings too. At least there are no renovictions in my building. So to come back to that, back in 2017, the federal government began consultations that went into 2018 right up until 2019 on the modernization of the Official Languages Act. QCGN was really active in that. We held public consultations, we held community forums on the whole issue across the province, regions, remote areas, urban areas of our communities. And as did Francophone organizations representing French minority communities outside of Quebec. And there was a consensus. The consensus was that the fundamental pillar of Canadian society and our democracy, which is two official languages and the equality of both languages within the quasi-constitutional piece of legislation, which is the Official Languages Act, must continue and be reaffirmed, one. Secondly, that the federal government needed to beef up the authority and powers of the Official Languages Commissioner. Thirdly, that the government needed to name a central agency, there was a consensus, it should be Treasury Board, that had the legal obligation to ensure that across federal institutions that come under the Official Languages Act, all of the policies, measures, programs had to align and respect the Official Languages Act. And that included the protection and promotion of French in those areas where it clearly was not happening. But it also meant redressing many of the systemic issues that the English-speaking minority community in Quebec face, underrepresentation in federal institutions, higher levels of poverty, higher levels of unemployment. We had a whole list, demographics, the stats to back it up. So all of this went on, and there was a consensus amongst both official language minority communities that these were the things that had to be done. 2019-20 comes around, and the dice is thrown by the Quebec government that it's going to do a major reform of the Charter of the French Language, commonly called Bill 101, and all kinds of trial balloons began to go up. We continued our discussions and dialogue with Minister Joly and her team. In the fall, after I was elected, we began to get the real sense from the throne speech, but also from other speeches that had been made by Prime Minister Trudeau and by Minister Joly, that given the threat from the Quebec government that they were going to try to encroach on federal jurisdiction, that is federally regulated private sector businesses operating in Quebec, to establish language rights, French only, and make them subject to Bill 101. Our discussions began with Minister Joly, and we were very clear that the federal government should not permit the Quebec government to encroach on federal jurisdiction for language rights in the place of work for federally regulated businesses. One, federal government should establish for the first time language rights in those businesses for both English and French, as actually exists now under the Official Languages Act for the federal government and for federal institutions, crown corporations that are already subject to the OLA. We then understood that the federal government was not going to establish language rights for both English and French, equality of two official languages in Quebec and elsewhere for private businesses that are federally regulated. They were going to establish language rights for French only. And we adamantly opposed that. We had many discussions, meetings, myself with Minister Joly, but also the operational staff from QCGN, our legal experts, with the legal experts and political staff of Minister Joly. We had meetings with Minister Lametti, with senior policy people in the Prime Minister's office. And at each turn, we said, one, do not do this. Two, if you decide to go ahead and do this, please do not put it in the Official Languages Act. Establish and create a bill on its own to protect and promote French in the workplace for federally regulated businesses, and put the provisions in that separate and individual act. Well, C-32 was tabled and it's in the Official Languages Act. And so we're now insisting that it has to come out of the act, because contrary to what we're being told, by putting it in the act, we know that courts, because Canadian government, unlike Quebec government, hasn't used the notwithstanding clause. That means any violation, anyone who believes that their language rights have been encroached upon by Bill C-32, if it's adopted as is, will be able to challenge it before the courts. And the courts will look at the entire piece of legislation, in this case, C-32, where it lauds the Charter of the French Language, where it recognizes French as the official language and common language of Quebec, and based on that, may very well make interpretations that say English speakers in Quebec don't have a right, if they work in those businesses, to be able to work in English. So we've had these discussions, we're continuing these discussions, but at the same time, we're not holding our breath that we will succeed in convincing the government to do as we've asked. And that's why we've got our campaign that Jonathan just talked about, in order to put the heat on to individual members of parliament, bring it to the business sector. I don't think that the business sector necessarily has done the kind of deep dive into C32 that QCGN has done through its able counsel and her team. I don't think that the business sector has done the deep dive into Bill 96 and the impacts, the economic impacts that will have. I don't think that they know that. So part of our outreach will be to reach out to the business associations, le Conseil du Patronat, les chambres de commerce, the senior managers in the financial institutions that are responsible for bringing investment into Quebec and supporting businesses in Quebec. They need to know what Bill 96 will, the kind of environment it's actually going to create. And it's not an environment where investors from outside of Quebec are going to want to put their money.
I think, Marlene, also, we each have, and you and I know that as being former members of parliament, we each as individual citizens have the power to talk, to not only talk, but insist on changes being made both to our MNA and to our MP.
Yes.
And as everybody knows, my MP is Mélanie Joly, and I have been doing that, as you know. and so I think we lose sight often as citizens that we do have the power. We have the power. I think I'm not pessimistic at this point about not being able to make changes to Bill C-32. It is a bill that hasn't gone to committee. It wasn't even voted on in the House of Commons. As we know, they've adjourned for the summer. There will be an election campaign. And as you know, election campaigns, a great time. Hopefully they'll be doing door to door if we're all vaccinated, and you'll be able to ask them the question directly. I think one of the biggest other concerns that I saw in the chat by some of the participants is the obviously the notwithstanding clause and the overuse of notwithstanding clause on Bill 96. I did try to put that question to Christopher Skeete, although he didn't have time, but I think you've put it to him many, many times, as has also our lawyer who did an excellent presentation last night. And I love the image of the iceberg where Bill 96, most of the problematic areas of the bill are underwater rather than over the water. And I think Mr. Skeete presented us what was above the water rather than what was below the water. So I think it's interesting, but that is one concern. The other concern, because you raised the issue of the businesses, this not to go in there and seize the property and in fact to take the computers and any other material. It's an invasion of privacy, as we know. Obviously, this will go to the courts. So we're in for a long battle. But I think those two things, to me, and as I raised them also with Christopher Skeete, are very problematic. It's the first time I've seen, as someone who's been in politics, this type of legislation where they can just walk into a business, okay, without a warrant, okay, without due diligence, without court overview, and seize any material that's in a business. And I think the business community has to wake up, as you said. But over to you.
Definitely. We have called Quebec's use of the notwithstanding clause to override the fundamental human rights that are protected under the Quebec Charter of Human Rights and Freedoms and the federal Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms as creating a charter-free zone in Quebec. And people, we need to get the message out, because when Christopher Skeete says, oh, it's ridiculous to try and claim that your medical records could be seized without a warrant. The Bill 96 doesn't do that. Well, let me give you an example. We know that we have private medical for-profit clinics. They do operations The Quebec government contracts them because of the wait lists in the public institutions. So you have, I'm sent, Marlene Jennings is up for an operation. Let's say it's, I have adenoids, enlarged adenoids that have to be removed. And because it's not considered essential, I'm on a wait list. So the hospital offers me, we can send you to this private medical clinic where you can be operated on. It's day surgery. And a RAMQ is going to pay for it. So I go there. It's a for-profit clinic. And it has more than 25 employees because it's a pretty darn large clinic. That means it comes under Bill 96 if adopted as is. And under Bill 96, it has a new article which allows any person to denounce a whistleblower that they believe a violation has happened or may happen, not that it has happened, or may happen. And on the basis of that denunciation, without needing to have reasonable grounds to believe that a violation has in fact occurred, Section 174 of Bill 96 allows an inspector to enter any place of business, search, seize without a warrant. And because of the use of the notwithstanding clause, it means that that business and any employee who was working there who saw his cell phone, iPad, computer taken because it was supplied by the employer cannot go to court because the notwithstanding clause says, notwithstanding your right to not be subject to abusive search and seizure, it doesn't, we can do it and the courts can't say anything. Notwithstanding your right to privacy, we can seize all of this. Well, guess what? If it's a for-profit medical clinic, what's going to be seized? The medical electronic files of patients. Why? Because maybe I spoke to the doctor, the surgeon, in English, and he responded in English. And that medical clinic, because it's private, doesn't come under the access program to services in English in health and social services. That's, I beg Christopher Skeete, I beg Premier Legault, tell me, not only am I wrong, show me the sections in Bill 96 that make it clear that that scenario could never happen. Please, I would love to be proven wrong. And I'm someone, my family will tell you, Eleni will tell you, I love to be right. But in this case, I want to be wrong.
Thank you, Marlene. There is an interesting quote in the chat. So regarding the notwithstanding clause, note that quote by John Peter Murphy in a lecture in December 1995, and I quote, "Never let them set aside individual human rights in the name of the collective rights of society." This is exactly what Bill 96 does. I think that's very true.
What
I
I
wanted
find
to also
really,
ask you,
if I can just interrupt, what I
please,
find
go ahead.
really interesting is that the preliminary analysis of the polling that QCGN with Avenue did shows that a majority of Francophones don't believe that collective rights, including the protection of French, should override individual rights for freedom, for access to justice in English or in any other language, etc. Really interesting.
The Great Divide, though, shows also in that polling, in terms of the perceptions.
Yes.
And again, we're dealing with perceptions in many ways. The other troubling aspect, I think, is the fact that Mr. Skeete and the Quebec government is not showing us how they arrived at the fact that the French language is fragile. Yes, we do accept that it is fragile to a certain extent in the sea of North America. But in terms of not providing us with a type of research-based analysis, I find it very disturbing. I mean, if you're going to be transparent, if you really believe in what you're doing in terms of the legislation, then I think there has to be more transparency provided by the Quebec government in terms of the breakdown of what we consider mother tongue. That came up actually in the chat room also. How are we actually using the data that is available? What are we actually using as evidence in terms to bring this forward? And it's frightening that he decided that they've decided not to to allow access to that information. I don't know if you, in those conversations with Mr. Skeete and the Premier, have been given any empirical evidence. That's the word I've been looking for, empirical evidence, in terms of the the huge decline of the French language. And that's not taking into account, I'm assuming, that more and more immigrants are actually coming to Canada and whose mother tongue is neither English nor French, if we're going to evaluate mother tongue.
It's really interesting because, yes, there is some data coming from Stats Canada that shows that the percentage of mother tongue francophones across Canada, but also in Quebec, has diminished, okay? But those same statistics show that the percentage of mother tongue born in Canada, English speakers across Canada, has also decreased. And our increased population is based now on immigration because of our extremely low birth rate, one. So anytime we want to talk about the promotion and protection of French and the fragility of French, there has to be an acknowledgement that simply on the demographic level, given the low birth rate, Quebec Francophone majority cannot repopulate itself by itself and has to rely on immigration. And that's when the issue of integration and the attraction of French and ensuring that immigrants who come, who master French already, or who learn to speak French fluently and to work in French and study in French fluently, are made to feel full Quebecers and not second-class citizens. There has been some problem on that front of integration. The other point that the government doesn't want to talk about is that over 50% of the Francophone majority population are illiterate or functionally illiterate. So if French is fragile, a huge reason for that is that reality. And so far, because they refuse to really talk about it, they're not addressing it.
Thank you, Marlene. Now we're going to go back to our panel discussion. It's been interesting, dear friend, and I hope everybody who's listening in had an insight on all the hard work that Marlene and also the whole team at QCGN are doing. So thank you, Marlene, and we'll see you later.
Thank you. Yes.
So welcome back, everybody. It's great to be on time. It's great to be ahead of time, in fact. So now I'd like to invite our panel, and I'll begin. As you know, Bill 96 is the new Bill 101, as some people are calling it, and it has huge impact in numerous sectors. So I'm pleased to invite a lot of very good friends and advocates over the years. We have fought many battles, dear friends, and we're going to fight another battle. So I'd like to welcome today, first of all, the QCGN lawyer and member, Matt Aronson, who's been actually at the forefront also. And you were earlier, Matt, having a great conversation with one of our participants who's been very active. And Eric Maldoff. Hi, Eric. How are you? Hello. Welcome. As well as François Vincent, the Vice President Quebec of CFIB, and Russell Copeman. Hi, Russell, who was an MNA for many years and knows all about these battles firsthand, and who is presently the Director General of the Quebec English School Board Association, and Cote Saint-Luc Mayor Mitchell Brownstein. Welcome, everyone. We look forward to your comments, and I'll now pass the floor over to Eric.
Thank you, Eleni, and thank you for inviting me to be with you. I've been asked to moderate this panel. I will try to keep it moving along quickly so we stay on time. Otherwise, I'll turn off my sound and video. You've been introduced to the people who will be speaking. I would just mention right now, Russ Copeman, you all know, is now the Executive Director of the English School Board of Montreal, and will be speaking on education. It's Mitch Brownstein. Mitchell Brownstein is the Mayor of Cote Saint-Luc, and will be speaking on the effect on municipalities. Matt Aronson will be addressing the question of access to justice. François Vincent will be speaking to small and medium-sized business. And I will say a few words on health and social services. And I've been asked to make a few comments on the overall picture. Without further ado, I would turn to Russ Copeman. Hope I'm not surprising you, Russ. We await your comments on your views of the impact of the Bill 96 on the education sector.
Thanks, Eric. Eric uncharacteristically committed a slight slip of the tongue, saying I was with the English Montreal School Board. Of course, I'm the Executive Director of the Quebec English School Boards Association. I did a stint as Interim Director General of the EMSB, but that stint is over, and I'm back to my day job.
My apologies.
It's quite all right, Eric. As I say, it's uncharacteristic. It's a pleasure to be with you all this morning. I'm going to concentrate on those provisions of Bill 96 that affect the education system, the education sector directly, but as institutions of the English-speaking community, and that's what English school boards consider themselves to be. We're more broadly concerned about some of the effects of Bill 96 on our community, and that includes, and we're going to have that discussion this morning, the limits on the knowledge of English for judges appointed by the government of Quebec, which includes, by the way, municipal court judges. The powers of the Office Québécois de la langue française inspectors, which seem to be broadened and maybe even a little almost bordering on extrajudicial. The unilateral constitutional amendment declaring that French is the only official language of Quebec in the Canadian Constitution is of concern to us. And of course, the blanket and what we're sometimes describing as nonchalant use of both notwithstanding clauses that would affect all provisions of the Charter of the French language and all provisions of Bill 96. More specifically, with regard to education, we have sort of, again, three sectors. We have school boards, elementary, primary, elementary, high school, and adult education and vocational education. We tend to call that the education sector. And then, of course, there's the higher education. There's CEGEPs and universities. For school boards, specifically, Bill 96 limits the duration of temporary certificates to study in English for foreign nationals. There are a certain number of people in any given year who are not eligible for English education by virtue of Bill 101 and by virtue of Section 23 of the Canadian Constitution, who are granted temporary certificates for their children to attend English schools. They have to fall into certain categories, of course. It has to be temporary. Those certificates currently are open-ended. Bill 96 for foreign nationals restricts those to 3 years, and it's a hard 3-year stop, and we're concerned about that. We think it's going to affect the ability of perhaps larger companies to attract foreign nationals, who may want their children while they're here temporarily to study in English. It may affect people wanting to work in CEGEPs or universities, professors who take a temporary position at one of our universities. Again, there's a hard stop. If they're not eligible, if their children are not eligible, there's a hard stop of 3 years on these temporary certificates, and that's a change. And we think it is not a salutary change. For CEGEPs, there's of course the famous cap on enrollment that has been in the news a little bit. In fact, I attended a meeting of the Consortium of Higher Education Institutions yesterday. People are surprised that that cap on enrollment is being put into effect for the upcoming school year by Minister McCann without Bill 96 even having been adopted. So there's already the cap. It seems to be enforced, and it allows the English CEGEPs to grow at a fixed rate. The flip side to that, and it's odd for, and the QSBA is concerned about that cap on enrollment, but the flip side to that is that the same bill now requires that English CEGEPs give priority to students eligible to study in English for their admission. So, anecdotally, we knew of stories of people, graduates from English high school, not able to get into their program of choice because of the tremendous pressure put on registrations in English CEGEPs. And if Bill 96 is adopted, each English CEGEP has to develop a policy giving priority to students who apply who are eligible for English education. And we see, of course, the designation formally of CEGEPs and universities as English language CEGEPs and English language universities, which doesn't appear in the law currently. For CEGEPs, there's a new requirement for a uniform French exam to graduate. But again, students coming out of English high schools are exempt from that uniform French exam. Universities, lesser, I would say, effect on them, more relating to the language of communication, and I'll sort of just close on that topic. So for all three sectors, school boards, CEGEPs, and universities, there's this notion of being exemplary when it comes to the use of the French language in the language of communication. I'm not entirely sure what that means. We don't fully understand the impact of that, but it's of some concern. The way we read Bill 96, for example, it is possible that English school boards would have to communicate with the Parents Association or their unions in French. And that just seems to be odd to us. We already have the ability to communicate with our clientele for quote unquote pedagogical reasons. That is to say, we can send out notices to parents and students in English only. But even there, the office occasionally comes in and says, that's not really a pedagogical reason. Therefore, we're limiting your ability to send out communication in English only. So we're very concerned about that. We already communicate with the government of Quebec in French only. So it's not a question of communicating with the government, but it's more a question of communicating with quote unquote moral persons or associations. Again, we could be in this peculiar situation of having to write to our unions or write to our parents' committees in French, talking about our education system. So that gives you a thumbnail summary of the effects on the education network, Eric. I think you're still muted, Eric, which is unfortunate, but. I could go on longer to fill the gap, but I don't think that's really the
Russell, thank you.
I don't think that's really the objective there. So
I think Eric put out his video instead of his mute button. Perhaps, Eric? There you are, Eric. Okay.
I had not put on the mute, so somebody at the other end had done that wisely. Thanks, Russ. I was saying that there'll be a chance for questions at the end of the various summaries that we receive. Moving right along now. why don't we go to Mitch Brownstein on the municipal scene?
Thank you. Anyway, it's great being here with a lot of my mentors, including you, Eric. I remember from our days at Alliance Quebec and so many others here today. And I just want to start off talking by mentors as I get into municipalities. As we know, Anthony House-Fathers is a member of parliament now, but he was mayor of Saint-Luc for 10 years. And he was always, and he was involved in Alliance Quebec way back when we all were. And he shares our values and made a wonderful speech, if you haven't heard it, at the, a 9-minute speech in Parliament. About what's going on here. I urge everybody to listen to it and also take advantage of the fact that we have that ally at the federal government, although we have to remember that our efforts have to be focused at the provincial level, because that's the only way we're going to affect change. I'm going to just go on a little history in terms of municipalities. So in 1977, we all know the charter of the French language came into force. And at the time, there was a lot of pushback, and particularly from areas in Quebec where there were more than 50% of the population that was not non-Francophone. So we got bilingual status at that time, and the criteria used was non-Francophone. But later it was changed. It was changed to Anglophone, and it was a definition that has been used since that change, which has been extremely narrow, which means that, any individual that had a mother tongue different than, different than English is not counted. It's not counted, they're considered. So our percentage, even in Cote Saint-Luc, the numbers they're giving us are 40%, when we know that the life in Cote Saint-Luc is really closer to 80% in terms of people who speak. 18% of our population is Francophone, but they count us somewhere in the 40-something% because they're using mother tongue. So this whole issue has become extremely dangerous. And it's interesting that if we look at the history, in 2013, the Parti Québécois came with the exact same discussion about taking away bilingual status. And at that time, Premier Legault and the CAQ were against it. And they said, absolutely not. It's permanent and you'll have your bilingual status always. And that is what happened in 2013. So it's interesting now that they come up with Bill 96, which really weakens our position in bilingual status. Yes, we see that now we're going to be able, if the law is passed in its present format, to, within 120 days from receiving a notice from the Office de la Langue Française that our bilingual status could be revoked, we'll have 120 days to pass a resolution to keep it. Now, when we heard this was all happening, the city of Cote Saint-Luc already passed a resolution. Of course, we'll have to pass another one when we get the notice, but we passed that resolution and we contacted the 89 boroughs and cities that presently have bilingual status. And many of them have already passed resolutions as well. But the reality is we are hearing that there are several that may voluntarily relinquish their status and not keep it, which weakens the situation for all of us. Because what I'm going to speak about today is not only how we as Quebecers, Anglophone Quebecers, are going to be living in cities that have bilingual status, but also, because we know we don't only stay in our cities. We go up north. Some of us might have a country house. We travel. We go on vacations here and there to other areas of the province, and we need services. Sometimes, particularly our elderly, who might not be that fluent in English. And what type of services will they receive from municipalities that have bilingual status and municipalities that do not? So, first of all, we are the only jurisdiction in the world where we need permission to provide service to a minority group. Any other municipality, any other place in the world, if you want to provide service to a minority group, you can, and you can do it in any way that you wish. In fact, in Finland, if 8% of the population is Swedish, the Finland government requires that the service is given to Swedish individuals in their language. So there's a requirement to give, not permission to give. We're the only jurisdiction in the world where we need permission, and we live this life and we think it's normal, but it's not. We need permission to give service in another language. What I explained about that issue, and I think it's important for us to continue to express our concerns, not only to the Anglophone community, but as much as possible on French media, was that imagine way back at the beginning of the pandemic when the city of Cote-Saint-Luc decided that we wanted to make masks mandatory in commerce, and we could only do that in French. We couldn't explain anything in English. It would not have been like a 24-hour understanding or 2-day understanding by our entire community that this is the reality and this is what you're going to have to do. But it was fast and everybody understood it. And there wasn't a problem because we did it in both languages. Now, where do we go from here? So we look at Bill 96 very carefully. And as it applies to municipalities is that all employers must, including us, must take reasonable means not to require knowledge of English. Even if we have bilingual status, it seems that that article would apply. So that means if, let's say we have somebody, 4 people working at the front desk and 1 person, and they all are bilingual, except we get a vacancy and somebody applies who only speaks French, but there's 3 other people at the front desk. There are clauses in the law that would say that we should find a way to allow an individual who only speaks French to work in our municipality if we have enough other people that could accommodate those who need it. There is also a clause that says, that we have the duty to use exemplary and exclusive use of French and not systematic use of English. And all municipalities need to draft a directive of when we will use English. We need to draft a directive of when we will use English and why. This directive is going to be reviewed by the minister, and it can be reviewed at any time by any individual who wants to make a complaint about the way that the directive is drafted and how we think we should be able to use English. And if the minister feels that it's inappropriate, it would have to be amended. And that's pretty serious because, in Cote-Saint-Luc, it'll be very interesting the way we draft that directive. So you're supposed to give communication in French only unless you have bilingual status, and oral communication only in French and anywhere outside of cities that don't have bilingual status. But you need to check if you're somebody on the phone and you're speaking to somebody and they want service in English, you're supposed to somehow verify if they're eligible to receive English service. I don't even understand how you would do that. So you're in a municipality, doesn't have bilingual status. Somebody calls you up and they don't understand French and they want some service, and you don't have to give it to them until you verify that they're eligible. Meaning, that they have eligibility based on their education and they have the right to receive that service. That's a weird clause in the law that I don't know how they would be able to apply. And of course, like we're all saying over and over again, this is, the first time that they're using the notwithstanding clause in a preemptive way. Historically, we always, it's something that's struck down in the courts would then be considered to use a notwithstanding clause, but to use it in a blanket way like this is something that I think is the most important thing we're all going to work towards stopping. Now, I believe, like so many others, that we really have to work as a group to get the entire Quebec population to realize how detrimental this law is, not only to municipalities, but to all Quebecers, Francophone and Anglophone, because we're moving out of a pandemic now, and we not have to concentrate on the economy. And this is counterproductive to anything that is going to be good for Quebec. If we want things to be good in Quebec, we need to concentrate on how to get back to, after the last pandemic, it was the roaring 20s after the Spanish flu. And we want it to be the roaring 20s here in Quebec. And the only way that's going to happen is if we concentrate on a business, the economy, healthcare, and ensure that we can move forward and not backwards, which is what this law is. It's really a step backwards and very, very limiting on our rights. And we're going to lose the next generation. It was, I was a Wager graduate in 1978, and there was all that talk about leaving the province. We don't want that again. And I know all Quebecers don't want that again. We don't want some of our great people who are contributing to this country to leave Quebec. So that's it. Thank you.
When we came
Thank you very much, Mitchell. Next, I'd like to call upon Matt Aronson to speak to us on what's happening in the justice sector.
Thank you very much, Maitre Maldoff. I got the distinct impression looking at the other panelists of what it must feel like to be called up from the junior leagues to play in the big game. I'm really honored to be able to speak here with these other illustrious panel members, and I hope that I can offer some commentary that is as deep and thought-provoking as the folks who came before me and as Mr. Vincent will after me. The question concerning justice is one that runs throughout this entire proposed bill. And we've already talked about the biggest headline issue here in terms of access to justice, and that's the unprecedented withdrawal of our rights under the Canadian and under the Quebec Charters of Rights and Freedoms. I could spend the entire time that has been allotted to me talking about how incredibly dangerous this kind of a blanket removal of our rights and recourse would be to the average citizen. We talked somewhat about this. Our illustrious chair, Marlene Jennings, did comment as before we began our presentation on how this might have a knock-on effect to the average citizen, especially when it comes to the types of charter rights that we've already taken for better or for worse a little bit for granted in our free and democratic Canadian and Quebec society. So those are rights like, for example, the right to privacy or the right to dignity or the right to your reputation. Even, to some extent, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms in Quebec, which a right that has been suspended is the right to the free and unfettered use of your own property. One would hope to believe that the legislature does not enact laws, especially ones as sweeping as this, for no reason at all. This isn't a question of laziness and to say, I'm just going to disregard all the rights. They have something in mind. And I don't want to suggest there's some nefarious plan here that goes beyond what is evident and obvious, but it is extremely worrying that at the very same time that the legislature is proposing suspending or creating this type of legislation to reorder our legal hierarchy to put the Charter of the French language at the very top, they also remove the possibility of having our justice system review what is being done in order to ensure that the average citizen is not being abused by this new legislation. So that's the lead. I mean, we could begin and end with that. I could go on forever, but there are a couple of other sort of eyebrow-raising items in this bill that I wanted to bring to the forefront too. One of the clauses I haven't seen a lot of people comment about here is the requirement in commercial contracts for, this is really something. At the moment, you can contract in any language that you like in Quebec. There's a standard clause that every lawyer puts at the end of an English language contract that says the parties have agreed to do this in English. It's been in place for a really long time. This new bill now requires that you can go ahead and make a contract between commercial parties in a language other than French, but only if the parties have been presented and reviewed the same contract in French first. So you can imagine, and I don't know how many folks who are sitting here with us today have had to engage the services of a lawyer to negotiate a contract, especially a complex one, especially with multiple parties. How difficult it would be to negotiate a contract between multiple parties, especially those who would prefer to do their business in a language other than French, and then create a contract in French so that everyone can review the same clauses and documentation in French in order to have the right to enter into that contract in a language other than French. I mean, when we speak of access to justice, we've got to think about this not just in terms of what can you do before a judge, what are your rights when confronted with a peace officer, etc. But access to justice runs through all the different activities that we go about in the course of our day. And commercial activities is one of the major and important parts of a free and just society. So when you impose upon parties or legal persons the obligation to conduct their business in French in preference to that of in English, not at the outset, but throughout the entire process, so that you can conclude a contract. Especially, think about this, right, where you've got a party within Quebec who may have access to French language lawyers or writers, etc., but trying to contract with somebody outside of Quebec to do something within our jurisdiction, you're going to have partners willing to do this with you in French when they may be coming from a foreign jurisdiction, but to do business in Quebec. Just the beginning, I mean, you can imagine how difficult this would be to explain to a party that isn't familiar with society here in Quebec and what type of situation we're faced with here. I don't really know how commercial parties are going to convince parties from outside of Quebec to go along with this rather than just take their business elsewhere. Now, this may not necessarily come to mind immediately as an access to justice question, but if you can't even enter into a contract with other parties, how on earth will you ever enforce your rights, right? So that's one thing that jumped out to me as a lawyer reviewing this draft bill. The other two things I wanted to bring to light are these requirements with respect to proceedings and with respect to judgments. Now, there's been a lot of mention already of the change in which the government may now start appointing judges who have absolutely no knowledge of any language other than French. This puts us into a really difficult situation because although they don't say so explicitly, one must understand that when you're going before a judicial body, and this doesn't necessarily have to be a judge, this also applies, by the way, to administrative proceedings. This could be something like the Régie de Logement, the housing court. It can be something as simple as an administrative decision that needs to be made long before you end up in front of a judge in the Superior Court of Appeals, etc. They have no obligation whatsoever to have any information or any understanding of your primary spoken language. So even if you are in a situation where you are lucky enough to have somebody who has an understanding of your own language, if you're a commercial party or legal entity, you still have to do your proceedings. That is to say, your written documentation that you're putting before a decision maker in French. If you do it in English, you have to have it translated. Now, this seems like if you're writing 2 lines of a bill, it seems like, oh, yeah, of course, we just have it translated. I mean, it's no big deal. But anybody who's actually tried to have this done realizes that there's a huge procedural barrier that gets created with this kind of obligation because there's only so many translators available at any given time. So if you are under pressure and you're a party that needs something done before a court, a decision to be made, a right to be enforced, and your lawyer says to you, like, look, we can do this the easy way or we can do it the hard way. You want to do it in English? I mean, that's no problem, but we're going to have to get a translator. Once we finish our drafts, we're going to have to send it to the translator. We'll have to wait for the translator to get it back, and then we can file it. When the translators are being bombarded by parties left, right, and center, that creates procedural delays that may not necessarily work with the procedural delays or procedural deadlines that are imposed by a court. So you put these parties in a position where you could have 2 Anglophone businesses that are facing off against each other in front of an Anglophone judge who, for the sake of being able to do this efficiently, have no choice but to do all their proceedings in French. Now you turn to your bar and say, well, I prefer to use a lawyer who can work in English because I really understand where I'm coming from, what I'm doing, but I need it done quickly. So there is a sudden preference given to francophone lawyers who are going to be able to say, oh yeah, we've got the services in house, we can do this quickly, easily, no problem. Now, all of us practicing law in Quebec do make an effort to be able to speak, read, and write, and present in French. Of course, obviously, we've got to be able to do that. But a great number of my clients, and I think other lawyers in the room will say the same thing, will come to me because I'm able to speak to them in their language of their choice. So this puts the entire legal system in any language other than French at a massive disadvantage from a procedural standpoint. Going forward, and here's the really scary part, judgments need to be done in French. Now, the way this law is constructed, it says that a translation will be done immediately by the court of a judgment rendered in a language other than French. Immediately can mean a lot of things in the context of available translators. If you only have so many English language translators available to translate judgments, and there are already delays, the delays will grow because people cannot just, you know, miraculously create a translation of a complex legal document or a judgment overnight. What I presume will end up happening here is drafts of a judgment will have to be written by a judge, sent to a translator, and they'll have to wait for the translation to be ready in order to actually bring forward a judgment to conclude a proceeding. Because anything else would mean that the translation isn't immediate. So again, access delayed is, or justice delayed is justice denied. If you're an Anglophone party wishing to be able to get a judgment before a judge who understands English, you're still going to have to wait for God knows how long for translators to be available. We now put ourselves in a situation where the entire legal system is dependent on the schedules of translators. And as you are well aware, I'm sure, English language translation is not going to be a priority of this government because there are a lot of priorities that rank ahead of it. So I ask you, what do you think is going to happen? Sarah Cohen has jumped in to say, pays for the translator. In the case where the judgment is rendered in English and must be translated to French, it is actually paid for by the state. If it's the other way around, then I believe it has to be paid for by the parties. Certainly with respect to the to proceedings, those have to be done by the parties, increasing the costs of the of any kind of legal activity that you may have ongoing in the courts in Quebec. The last thing I wanted to point to in terms of access to justice is all of the various different administrative functions that the state provides. And as my colleague has already referred to, there's this obligation, there's this carve out for English language services for people who are eligible. I don't know about you, but it makes me extremely uncomfortable to think that there's going to be a list somewhere of all the Anglophones who have the right to have access to quasi administrative civil servants, decision makers, etc., in our native language. I really don't like the idea of having to demonstrate that I am eligible to be a member of what looks to me like the creation of a new kind of a linguistic ghetto. That I, because of an accident of my birth, or the fact that my great grandparents were denied education in French and had to get it in English, somehow do get a right that my my friends or my family who emigrated to Quebec later, as recently as last year, for example, don't get, even though they come from the same type of linguistic background that I do. And so I primarily am an immigration lawyer, and we already struggle to be able to get service for our clients who are coming and wanting to settle in Quebec, wanting to live here and build a life for themselves, contribute to our country and to our economy, and be able to serve them in their language, their Canadian language of choice, which is English, because their first language is something else. Their second language is English, and their third language is French. We do have to go through, in many cases, through the Quebec it's very interestingly been renamed the Quebec Ministry of Integration, Franchisation, and oh God, immigration, franchisation, and integration, in order to get the Quebec selection certificates necessary to allow people to stay in Quebec. And this isn't even the people who are obligated to demonstrate their French language skills. These are people like married a Quebecer and just want to come here and be with their spouse. We've got to get this paperwork from this ministry. Getting it in English is very, very difficult now. It will be impossible to do for people who are coming from outside the country, who are therefore categorically ineligible for service in a language other than French when Bill 96 takes effect. So that's just one example, and it's going to be running all over the place, right? Of barriers that are going to be created to be able to access the administrative and judicial functions of the state by this law, to the detriment not only of the English-speaking community and the Allophone community, but of the community as a whole. Because as someone just pointed out in the chat, we have a huge number of job seekers coming into the province to contribute to our economy, where there are massive labor shortages, who are coming here because there are opportunities, but not necessarily coming here because they are Francophone. And as a result, the government is going to be imposing more and more systemic barriers, which make Quebec a more difficult place to live if you weren't, by accident of birth, born to a Francophone family. And I think that's a really, really scary situation for us all to be in. Now, I could go on and on and on. I don't want to take up any more time here. I'm sure that the other members of this committee, and with respect, and certainly Major Maldoff, who's been doing this for a great deal more time than I, and has a lot more insight to offer, may have more comments at the end of the presentation. But I thank you for your time and for listening to our concerns about how this will affect access to justice in languages other than French. And I'll yield the floor. You're still
You're on
muted,
mute, Eric.
See, this will be what it'll be like under Bill 96. The Anglophone voices are muted.
Just so you know, I'm not muting myself, so someone who's operating this is. François, Vincent, vous avez la parole concernant les PME.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the invitation. I can assure you that CFIB will be there to voice the view of small businesses, and will be there to voice the view of small businesses that have owners who have mother tongues in English. I did the submission in 2012 then when the Parti Québécois tried to do it, and we will be there to voice the view of la communauté d'affaires. Just before starting, I want to thank Russell Copeman. I did have the chance to meet him 10 years ago, and I know that he did a lot for your community, but he did a lot for me as a professional and as a person to grow. So thank you very much, and I'm honored to be at the same panel as you. So now on the Bill 96, how I read it, I think I try to not read it too often because it gives me a lot of headaches, and it will give a lot of headaches for small business owners. First of all, I want to talk about the impact on the cost of regulation. You know, red tape is very is really bad for the economy, and the burden is very high in Quebec. Annually, the cost of regulation is 8.2 billion for businesses. And this new bill will have an impact to increase the rate that burden, but will increase it for small businesses. And when you look at it, the cost of regulation is inversely proportional to the number of employees, the size of the company. And right now, they will put the new barriers to businesses between 25 and 50 employees. And to show you regarding to a study we did in January 2021, the average annual time spent on regulation by employees by size of business is the double for businesses who have 20 to 49 employees than businesses who have 50 employees or more. It's 37 hours per employee for a business of 20 to 49. And for businesses then more than 50 employees is 18 hours. So they will ask, for example, I will give two examples. For a small business of 25 employees that have the half of them part-time in Beaconsfield, for example, who do import and export and do have mother tongue English employees in their company, and do the majority of their work by interacting with businesses elsewhere in Quebec. So they will have to fill pages of to prove to the government that they are working in French. So basically, we did it in CFIB this last year, and you have to fill a 2-page form to say to the office that you want to do the Francization process, and after that is a 16 pages form, and when the Office Québécois de la langue française decide that you are okay, you have to do a 16 pages form every 3 years. So for businesses like that in Beaconsfield, for example, another example, a garage Alma that have all these employees that are francophone and work 100% in French, they will have to do the same paperwork. So for that, we don't see that as a positive for small businesses, and they have responded on that businesses will have 3 years to comply, so it's not bad, and that l'Office québécois de la langue française will be there to help. But even if you give 3, 4, or 5 years, you still ask the same regulation for big businesses. So it's not somebody that we think is going to help small businesses. And if they really wanted to do it, they would have written an article section precisely that would say that the burden will be less for smaller businesses, and they didn't do that. And more of that, on the page 50, they will give less time for businesses to comply to the Office québécois de la langue française. Before the Bill 96, the time to comply is 6 months. They give 6 months to business to comply to the Office québécois de la langue française, and now they want to change that for 3 months. So they will put more red tape on small businesses, and they will give them less time to do it. I want also to talk about the hiring process. They have said in the bill that all reasonable means that the businesses have to prove that the position that they want to hire or to get a promotion, the English is not necessarily a demand for the businesses. On that, maybe 2 things to share to you. The first is that we have to see that as in the scope that we are in the economy that is linked with other economy of the world. So it's difficult for a business, and even a smaller businesses, not to ask for the employees to have basic in English. And you see, it's not my first language, and CFIB take a chance on me, like Abba said in one song. But I'm able to interact with my colleagues in English in the rest of Canada. So the economy is really linked with other region, and I can say that in 2018, Quebec, 20% of their business were two-way traders, 68% importers only, and 12% exporters only. So these businesses have to have an employee who is able to connect with the other company, because except of Quebec, businesses, the language of business communities in the world is English. And if you have less employees and there's somebody that is sick, you have to have somebody who is able to get the job done. And on the big scandal that they try to say on the 40% of businesses who were asking employees to be able to understand English when they hired. On the survey that the Office québécois de la langue française did, the question was if it was an obligation or if it was something that the businesses wanted to have. So it's not the same thing that to wish for and to ask for, but they did the communication to say that it was a reduction of the French in workplaces. But when you look at the number in French, the number, I think it was 68% that was asked by businesses. And the other thing about that is the shortage of labor. 2 small businesses out of 3 are in a situation of shortage of labor. Half of business owners have to work more hours to cope, and 26% have to refuse contracts, and they have to refuse sales. So they would not ask somebody to know English if they don't need it in the company because they cannot find workers. So basically, we think it's a non-issue. You should just let the businesses decide who is the best to fill the position, and if they want to improve the francisation, that they could put money and to help with the training, to help people to learn French, and they will do that with Francisation Québec. But it's not by asking new regulation for businesses that already have too much red tape and that will not help the economy of Quebec to go back again in a normal way. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Vincent. Well done. I've been asked to speak to the matter of health and social services. I'll try to be brief. The system is a bit complicated, but it's very important that people understand this. It's one of the top issues facing all Quebecers, and certainly English-speaking Quebecers. When I say issues, access to healthcare is always one of the top items on the list of public policy concerns. Under the Health and Social Services Act, and I'm just going to lay out briefly what the framework is that we're starting from. Under the Health and Social Services Act, we succeeded in getting an amendment in it back in 1986 that recognized the right of English-speaking Quebecers to obtain health and social services in the English language. That was further modified in the 90s, but the regime basically came down to this. It wasn't just a clear right, you have a right to service. It's a right, aside from being subject to available resources, which applies to all health and social services, it's subject to the development of access programs in every English health and social services access programs in every region of Quebec, which set out where services in English will be available. And those access programs are ultimately approved by the minister and the Quebec cabinet. And once approved, they have the effect of being a regulation, and therefore the services that are set out in the access programs become services to which English-speaking Quebecers have a right in every region. And the understanding is in some regions, they will have to have agreements with other regions because they don't have the services there, but arrangements have to be in place that English-speaking Quebecers can get the full range of services. Up to now, the definition of who could have access to those services was anybody whose preferred language of service for health and social services was English, which makes a lot of sense because it may be that English is their second language and that their mother tongue is a language other than French, and that as people age, for example, their facility in a second language declines in an emergency, all sorts of circumstances. So if the preferred language of service is English, you are entitled to have service. And there are government documents that actually say that. So that is the regime. In 2015, the major restructuring of the health and social service system took place. At that point, the Dr. Barrett's reform, 160 independent.
Eric, you're on mute, and it was not me who muted you.
Okay.
Okay.
Dr. Barrett's reform in 2015 amalgamated 160 institutions that were more or less independent into 22 integrated health centers, which I will call centers for the purposes of this discussion, and 7 unamalgamated institutions, which are basically university hospitals and research institutes like the McGill University Health Center, the SHUM, the Institute of Cardiology, etc. Those 22 centers are essentially regionally based, except in Montreal, there are 5 such centers. In the Montérégie, there are 3. And in Les Îles de la Madeleine, there are 2. And in every other region, there's 1. And those centers are essentially a network that is supposed to provide the full range of services for the people in their territory and to have interregional arrangements if they can't service them. That's the scheme of the Act, Health and Social Services Act. Access programs are developed by each institution. Now each center has to produce an access program, and each unamalgamated one produce an access program reviewed by a regional access committee, reviewed by a provincial access committee, which are members of our community, and commented upon or asked for revisions suggested, and then they're approved. At that point, the right is in place. Bill 96 has been written pretty much in disregard of that regime. So it does not fit with the regime under the Health and Social Services Act. What it has done is it has laid out general principles, being the right to be served by the civil administration, health and social services, professional orders in French, period. It has basically said that the civil administration, which is the civil service, related bodies to the civil service, health and social services, municipalities, and education. So it's everything. The civil administration must use French in an exemplary manner. And an exemplary manner is essentially defined as it has to use French exclusively. It has to promote the quality of French. And this is the first time now it's not good enough to speak French. It's now going to be measured in terms of quality for whatever that's going to do. It is to ensure the development of French and to protect the French language. So that is the mission of the civil administration. And to make things more clear, the Interpretation Acts and Bill 96 have declared that Bill 101, the Charter of the French Language as amended, is the paramount law in Quebec. All other laws of Quebec are to be interpreted in light of the Charter of the French Language and in support of the presumed intentions of the Charter of the French Language. That's a very important statement because it's a clear directive to the public administration of Quebec, the civil administration of Quebec, that French is the paramount language. And just to make sure anybody didn't understand that, the charters of rights and freedoms have been suspended by the use of the notwithstanding clause. Federally, it's for 5 years. Provincially, it's indefinite. So it takes precedence over even the charters of rights. And even without the notwithstanding clause, the Quebec Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which were called fundamental rights and freedoms, now because of Bill 96 have been downgraded to human rights and freedoms, has been also amended to be interpreted not to in any way diminish or suppress the intended goals of Bill 96 to promote the use of French. So that is basically where the civil administration has been directed in terms of healthcare. How does that fit for us? Well, Article 13.2 starts to talk about what the exemplary means, and exemplary is not only written, but oral communications, exclusively in French. So now 2 workers in the civil service of Quebec are to communicate with each other in French, orally. while performing their duties. That applies also to health and social service institutions, and I'll explain that a little further in a moment. Who can get service in English under that provision? Well, what it says is an individual, a natural person, can request services in English. And this isn't only for health and social services. And the public servant who's responding or provider who's responding may respond in English in order to obtain from that person information as to what would justify this person having the right to be communicated with in English. So they'll have this brief little conversation in English. And then some civil servant's going to decide whether you're entitled to that. Now, the bill also says, do everything you can, even where there is not a right to use the English language, not even an exception which gives you a right to use the language, where there's an option to use the language. And that's what they call it, an option, to do everything in their power not to have to use the option. And you look at every alternative before you get there. And who is entitled to have this little discussion about their right to service? Well, the only people who would be eligible for such service are people who are eligible for English language instruction. Now, that's a term we know of. A little bit weird because under the law to date, it's children who are eligible for English language instruction. Now we're talking about the parents being eligible. So that leads to a little legal conundrum that I'm sure Matt will enjoy in due course. But that's a definition that comes out of the education legislation. It does not have anything to do with health and social services. And we're going to use an education criteria now to determine the right to services other than education. In health, that could be, and I say this advisedly, deadly serious. The importance of all of this is that going back to our system of health and social services, there are right now or there were 22, excuse me, according to the OQLF, there were 38 recognized bilingual institutions. That means they are recognized under section 29.1 of Bill 101 to be allowed to function as institutionally bilingual, provided they could deliver all of their services in French. So all the rules of how they operated internally that generally applied, for the most part, did not apply. The institution had to be able to provide service. That was the test, and the Office de la Langue Française was to verify whether they could deliver services in French. Of the institutions that are there right now, and our current profile is this: 30% of the English-speaking community depends on access programs of 12 integrated health centers in which there are no recognized bilingual institutions. In other words, that's the situation. 35% of our community depends on the access programs of 8 integrated health centers, which have 1 or 2 institutions within them that have been designated bilingual. They generally tend to be small and covering very specific limited territories. For the rest of services in those territories, English-speaking Quebecers depend on services which are indicated in other facilities or institutions in the region to be able to offer service in English. Now circle back. They are dependent on institutions which are not recognized bilingual and therefore fall under the general rule of they don't have access if they're not eligible for English instruction, and the rule that do whatever you can not to provide service in a language other than French. that is discordant with the Health and Social Services Act. 35% of our community has the benefit of 2 integrated health and social service centers that are designated as bilingual under 29.1 of Bill 101. They're both in the western part of Montreal. And as I said, that's 35% of our population. The majority of our population, our community, depends on indicated services. We're talking like 65% depend on indicated services, which will fall under the general rules that I've mentioned to you under Bill 96, which in and of itself is going to be a problem in terms of their eligibility to get any services. For the institutions themselves, the challenge is going to be how to make services available in that environment. I would mention that the bill also indicates that it used to be that patient records, clinical records could be kept in either language at the will of the provider. And that a patient was entitled to get a summary in French if the clinical record was in English. Now they've gone on to say that not only are they entitled to a summary, but any other document of the medical nature that's in the patient's file must be translated into French, which will be a huge, now we're talking about lab reports and all sorts of other things are going to have to be translated. And many of these are coming out of bilingual institutions that can produce those documents in either language. Not many bilingual institutions, but they tend to have the facilities of labs and other things. Furthermore, it should be noted that it used to be a professional in Quebec and a member of a professional order. You have to prove a knowledge of French unless you went to English. You had a high school leaving certificate from Quebec. And once you were certified and licensed, it was for life unless you committed some sin against the profession, like raping a patient or something like that. Now what they've said is that professionals must maintain a quality and standard of French that is deemed to be appropriate for their profession. Anybody can complain. How that's going to work after that, they can be tested and evaluated. And failing to meet it, the professional code has been amended to say would be a derogatory act. And that means in normal people's language that they're out of the profession or suspended. Now,
Eric, I hate to interrupt.
I'm finishing.
Are you wrapping up? Thank you.
Yes, I am indeed. So that basically is the picture for health and social services. And it's a pretty difficult one for all of us. Looking to the overall picture, and I was asked to make a comment or two, and I will shut up momentarily. I tend to try to be rational as we deal with public policy. I don't understand this piece of legislation in terms of what have been defined publicly as being the reasons it's being done. One is the internet. And I defy anybody to tell me how this is going to change the power of the internet. The second is the massive number of people who speak English in North America. And I put out the same challenge again. And I would say that the third challenge, apparently, is that our birth rate is somewhat off. So we're not having as many natural-born French Canadians, and we're finding that the language used at home is marginally up in a language other than French, which, by the way, I don't think the language at home is anybody's business. But going back to the biggie items, this bill does nothing. And we are going to be burdened with two challenges that are here with us as a society in perpetuity. And the result of that is that we will have our civil liberties and human rights suspended in perpetuity if those challenges are really what this bill thinks it's meeting. Now, this is a complete perversion of the legal order of a democratic and liberal society where people have the right to live their lives and make choices. And I'm not making an argument for freedom of choice. The English-speaking community is with it. The vast majority are bilingual. The vast majority have accommodated. The vast majority have stayed here. The issue here is, are we going to live in a society where the state can start to dictate how we behave, how we think, how we function, and even tell us what kind of vocal music we are allowed to listen to?
I have the most ungrateful task of cutting off people who are passionate about what they're speaking about. And I understand, Eric, and I'm sorry, but it's been a long morning. I want to thank, first of all, I'll start in the order that they spoke. Russell for giving us the impact on education, from Mitchell to giving us the impact on municipalities, to Matt, who's always been hardworking for all of us at the QCGN, and François, merci beaucoup. I know we didn't use a lot of French today, but it was an English, mostly English participants, mais merci beaucoup et continuez le travail. Excellent, parce qu'on compte sur vous, parce que les entreprises sont très importantes dans la bataille sur les changements qu'on voudrait avoir à la loi, à les deux lois, à mon opinion. Et Eric, your passion always comes through. I love you for that. And I think we all at QCGN are very honored that you are part of this fight that we're going to continue to have and that we've had for many, many years. So I thank everybody. I do want to remind all the participants, because it is getting close to lunch and I'm sure some people are quite hungry and have to get back to work. But I want to remind everybody to something very important that you can go through. We'll go through the chat and we'll look at some of the questions and hopefully be able to answer them and get back to you. Do not forget that you have power, to all those listening to us, to please send your letter to Premier Legault and to the Minister Barrette, even to Mélanie Joly and Mr. Trudeau, as Mike keeps insisting on the chat. Yes, they should all know how we feel. But I want to give the floor just for a few minutes. There is somebody who is on, who's a member of Parliament, and out of respect, I wanted to give, if Anthony is still there, Anthony Housefather. Anthony, I'm not sure you're on. I did try communicating with you to give you the floor just for 2 minutes and thank you for standing up and speaking up for all of us. I know Craig Fergus also was on earlier. I hope I haven't missed anybody. I tried to go through the participants and see if there were other members of Parliament, but out of respect, I would like you to say a few words, Anthony, and then I'll turn it over again to Marlene, the chair.
Thank you, Eleni, and thank you to all of you, Eric, who is moderating the session, all the panelists, Russell, Marlene, everybody at QCGN. This is probably one of the toughest times the English-speaking community has faced. We have very few allies at the provincial level or the federal level, and we need to stand up for ourselves. And Bill 96 is a terrible slap in the face to the English-speaking community. I share the concerns that QCGN and many of the people who've spoken today have brought forward. I can only pledge to you that when it comes to fighting for the rights of the community, whether it relates to Bill 96, whether it relates to constitutional amendments, whether it relates to the use of the notwithstanding clause, whether it relates to the Official Languages Act, I will always be there with you and working with you to try to make things as best as we can, given the political and juridical context. So I try to believe that we have to be politically pragmatic and understand the legal framework, but at the same point in time, we have to fight for our rights and we have to assert ourselves, and we can't accept being second-class citizens in our own province or our own country. So while Marlene may say we're the most unpopular minority in Canada sometimes, and unfortunately that's true, that doesn't mean that that's fair or an accurate perception of who we are. We are a diverse community, not just made up of people of whom English is our first language or who have English language eligibility certificates. We are a community of people who come from all races, all religions, all ethnicities, and we're all English-speaking Quebecers and proud of it. We've learned French, we're happy to function in French, but we still have the right to ask for services in our own language. And I thank you again for all the work that all of you do across Quebec And again, I pledge to be there with you, and I'll be as forceful an advocate as I can be in the Liberal caucus and even publicly. Thanks.
Thank you, Anthony, and we are counting on you, and you do have our total support, and anything you need, we are with you, and we will continue to lobby your colleagues. Thank you, everyone, for your participation. I think people are dropping off very quickly. So Marlene, you have the closing statement, and thank you, everyone, for giving me the honor and pleasure of being your host today.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank Eleni for hosting and moderating this second part of our conference all morning. You've done a wonderful job. I'd like to thank all of the participants, from those who presented the poll survey, Sean, Jonathan Goldbloom. I'd like to thank Eric for your passion for the rights of our community, but also the rights of all Quebecers. When you said we need to decide what kind of society we want to live in, not just English-speaking Quebecers, but all Quebecers, you put your finger right on the nail. You really did. Thank you to Mitchell Brownstein, to François, Francis, Vincent, to Matt Aronson, to Russell Copeman. You also highlighted how Bill 96 is going to impact the rights of all Quebecers in education, health and social services, justice, the private sector. I did an op-ed that was published in the Montreal Gazette on January 1st, 2021. And I predicted that English-speaking Quebecers were witnessing the relative language peace that we have enjoyed for many years fade as 2020 drew to a close. I'm not pleased to say that my predictions were fully realized. I'm not pleased at all. We said we were determined to serve as crucial and constructive voices throughout language debates that were bound to prove emotional and sometimes acrimonious. Over the past few weeks, some have accused us, and me in particular, of overreacting. Others have accused us, and me in particular, of not being forceful enough. Well, my grandmother used to say, it's usually a good sign when you land smack dab in the middle between what our community refers to as the angry phones and the lamb lobby. And QCGN is that constructive and crucial voice. And we will continue to be that. We also fulfilled another promise to be a center of evidence-based expertise and collective action. And we've done our homework. Many in the other sectors, education, health and social services, justice, and the private sector are relying on QCGN's deep dive into Bill 96, in many cases because they don't have the resources to do it. So we're sharing our analysis, and we're continuing the deep dive below the surface to see the rest of the iceberg, and it's starting to raise flags, and we want to continue to do that, but we need your help. Everyone here who's here as an individual, please use the toolkit that we have to identify your member of parliament, your MNA, and write to them about Bill 96. And those who are here as representatives of associations, please bring this information to your association and encourage your association to spread it to everyone that in their network. This needs to get out. And yes, we have a piece to try to reach the Francophone majority. Jonathan talked a little bit about our campaign strategy, but that is definitely part of the strategy because I'm reminded of what Maitre Pearl Eliadis stated last night during our conference. And she said, language rights are human rights. And I agree wholeheartedly with Pearl when she said we have to do everything in our power to prevent many of these proposals of Bill 96 from moving forward. So we're counting on you. We will continue to be vocal. We will continue to do that deep dive homework to be able to supply you with the actual facts. And let's ask Mr. Skeete, does Bill 96 allow for warrantless searches and seizures of any enterprise business operating in Quebec? Does it or doesn't it? Does it reduce access to health services to an adult whose child has an eligibility certificate to be educated in elementary and high school in English? Does it or doesn't it? Does the notwithstanding clause create a charter-free zone for Quebec by suspending indefinitely our human rights and freedoms under the Quebec Charter? There's no time limit to it. And why is it necessary to protect French? Why do they need to suspend our individual human rights and freedoms to protect French? Why is that necessary? And I'll end it with that, with saying thank you again to everyone who organized this conference of yesterday evening and this morning. And thank you to all of the participants. Bye all.
Marlene, I forgot to mention Jennifer Macaron was also on. I apologize, Jennifer, for not, I was looking at the federal members, but thank you, Jennifer, also. Thank you, Marlene. Thank you to the QCGN, and the fight will continue. And we will be there at the forefront of that fight, the QCGN. Thank you, and have a great day, everyone. Enjoy your lunch, enjoy the day. I'm not sure if it's all a great day or we're having another thunderstorm or whatever, but thank you. Have a great day. Have a great day.
Bye.